Hello, welcome. My name is Elaine Petruccelli, and I'm from Book Passage, where I'm broadcasting my part today. I am so excited to invite all of you to join us for this magnificent experience. Annie has been teaching for Book Passage for over 30 years, and now she teaches once a year for people where people can log on and be part of the class from all over the world, which is particularly wonderful because when we used to have a one-day class in our bookstore here in Corte Madera, people would write me and say, "This is driving me crazy. I don't live there. Can't you help me?" Well, now we can, and we'd like to welcome everybody wherever you are in the world. Uh, as we watch today, please know that you will be able to sit back and relax because you'll be able to see it again. You will have the link and it will be recorded, and you can, if you drop your pen and can't take notes fast enough, you'll be able to watch again. If one of your friends is upset because she forgot to sign on, she will be able to take the recorded class later by going to bookpassage.com and signing up. And speaking of going to bookpassage.com, you can also order any of Annie's books, and Annie will come to the bookstore and sign them. She will even personalize. Please don't ask her to write too much because I want to respect her hand, but I know that she has told me that she'll be happy to personalize the books. I keep learning from Annie every year, and so I'm particularly excited to watch this year as Annie gives us this fabulous class on why write, what to write, how to write. I can't wait. So I'm turning it over now to my friend and mentor, Anne Lamott.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I just want to give a shout out to the studio where I'm recording this, which is called Square One Studio. It's at Square and then the numeral 1.studio. My son and his best friend, my other son, Reese Sakine, have a recording studio where they record people's audiobooks or interviews or events like today, Zoom events. And today I have just outdone myself because I forgot to send Reese the script. So I usually read off the teleprompter and it looks like I'm just thinking of all this stuff off the top of my head, but I actually forgot it. I forgot to send it and I forgot my phone and I had to borrow someone's phone outside of the
There should be
studio.
just can you just press on the link?
And so anyway, they are above and beyond the call of duty, and the assistant Katie has gone to my house to get the phone so that Reese can transcribe it onto the teleprompter. So there may be, and if you're young, you will be like this too someday. And it's good to surround yourself with really sweet, patient people. That's probably the most important advice I'm going to give you today. So in the meantime, I'm going to be reading from my notes, which I don't like to do, but this is what in recovery we call life on life's terms. So I am going to share with you every single thing I know about writing today, which ends up being pretty much everything I know about life. And then I'll leave at least half hour for your questions. I think Elaine said you can submit them in the chat and we'll save time at the end. You can ask anything about writing, publication, agents, libel, slander. And a lot of what I say today, you may have heard me say at other workshops or conferences, or that you read in Bird by Bird, but I can't help that. It's pretty much the one long song of writing I've been singing now for 45 years. I'm going to talk a lot about writing in general to begin with, and then I'll talk about specifics and tools and what helps me get any work done at all. And I'll tell you all my Bird by Bird secrets. And I just want to immerse you in writing and in the joy and the spiritual healing and challenge of writing. And I hope that I hope that what it does is give you a very benevolent kick in the butt if you're stuck or stalled. And if you've been writing something and you finish something, I hope it gives you the confidence to take the next step with it, whatever it is. And, I just want to immerse you. I want you to have a writing bath with me today. Okay, so I'll start off by telling you, I just sent off a new book Tuesday night. So all of this stuff is very, very fresh in my mind and close to my heart. Why we write, what we write, and the great mystery of all. How do we go from having a couple of ideas about wanting to write something? Maybe it's our life history. Maybe it's a book on what we've learned as teachers or mentors, or what we learned in the Peace Corps, or in the laboratory, or it's a novel or whatever. And it begins with all this blank paper, which is like an unassaulted ice flow. And how do we go from that kind of intimidating blankness to pages that we can hand over to someone? So first, I'll tell you why I wrote this new book, and this may inspire you to ask yourself why you're actually here today. I got this one idea, and it was that I wanted to write some pieces for my son and my grandson Jax for when I'm gone, that were stories about what had always worked in my life so far and what might work again, because I believe their futures are going to be pretty challenging, pretty weird. There's going to be really dramatic climate stuff going on. So I wanted them to have these pages that were stuff about, well, this has always worked and it will again, community, in this case, writing groups. This won't work, don't bother with it, and so on. And I got this one idea. And then, because my life is about bird by bird, I thought up one story I could tell that I felt I could leave in a kind of swag bag for Sam and Jax to pull out when things were really weird or hard for them, either globally or just in their hearts that day. And so I started writing that story. And of course, it was just terrible. The piece I wrote was just terrible, way, way, way too long. A third again longer than it needed to be, and really badly written and overwritten, and very purple prose and drama and showing off and trying to be witty, trying to get you to think that I'm just a very ironic and charming person and not a depressive or a person with anxiety. But I got a shitty first draft together. Then I went through and I took out all the lies, all the show-offing, most of the long descriptions, and I had a second draft. And then I got to push back my sleeves and do the fun part, which is the third draft. And I got it really in pretty good shape, just this one piece. And then I gave it to Neil. I always have 2 or 3 people who can read my stuff for me, who love the way I write and who respect my work, and yet who will be tough with me and say, these first 2 pages are just clearing your throat, and I would recommend you start at the bottom of page 2. Or they'll say, I love it, and then about 2/3 of the way through, you go off on this strange tangent, blah, blah, blah. So that I did one assignment. I did that one piece, and then I wrote another one. Now, the most important thing for me, and I've been doing this professionally for 49 years. This book will be published on my 70th birthday. It's my 20th book. And I think the good news for all of you is that I have just the exact same struggles with self-esteem and panic as you probably do every day when you sit down to write, and as I did at 26 when I published Hard Laughter, which is when Elaine and I first meet up. She had a bookstore about the size of your biggest bathroom, and we met up there when she bought some books of mine and sold them and introduced me to a tiny reading public. Not that much has changed. Everything I just described is how I write now. I get an idea. I always carry a pen. If you see me, you'll notice that my blue jeans usually have a little bit of pen stain in the back right-hand pocket. I always have paper. I have very fair skin. I can write down on my arms and hands ideas and transcribe them later if I forget my phone, which I have today. And I don't start with this great confidence of, whoa, this is my 19th book or my 20th book. I'm on a roll. What I do is I start off and I write about one page, and then I start to picture the critics going, oh God, it's Lamott again. Talk about beating a dead horse. Another Facey Lovey, book about her own complicated personal and psychiatric issues and little Facey and holiness stories. Why do I do this to myself? So that's the question. Why do you? Why are you willing to take a chance and put down some stories, some ideas, some memories, some visions, and maybe share it with somebody else? And I think I can answer that. I think probably, if I had to guess, 95% of you love to read, and you were saved in a sort of Christian meaning of salvation as small children when you found chapter books, that the lights went on, and you realized that you could read a book, get completely lost in it, get found in it, that the author had created an entire world for you to get lost in. And in getting lost in Stuart Little or Beezus and Ramona or the Odyssey or whatever, you really got found because you saw somebody reflecting what it means to be human and how we might live and how many mistakes we all make and who helps us and how life picks us up, pulls us to our feet and dusts our butts off and whatnot. So I bet a lot of you have wondered if you might be able to do that same sort of thing of providing a world, the world of you growing up in the deep South in the 40s and what that was like for a girl or a boy who knew he was gay, or a orphan or whatever, or that the story of I wrote the story of being a single mother in 1989. And you want to share what you have experienced and come through, what has transformed you, what has guided you, what has illuminated the path for you. It's really fun to entertain people. It's really great to be able to make people laugh about our most human foibles. And, in my case, all my great ideas, usually for other people. And, laughter is carbonated holiness. And if you can tell me a story, all of you who are here today, that is very human and true, whether it happened or not, and you can make me laugh, boy, I'm in. So I'm as grateful for good writing as I am for nature. And no matter how tough the day has been, or the week, or the last election cycle, or whatever, I know that I can crawl in bed with a book and I'm going to be home. And the bed isn't my book. The book is my bed in a certain way. It's my comfort. It's my covering. It's my warmth. And it's just really why I have been able to stand being here on a lot of really bad times over some really bad years were beautiful books and really good writing. To step out of your ordinary life into somebody else's. Okay, so I think we write for the obvious reason that there are memories, experiences, people, heroes, villains, maybe some in your own family, maybe somewhere down the hall right now, or moments or whole years that are inside us that seem to be tugging on our sleeves, hoping we'll scribble them down. And I can tell you, it's very damaging if this is on your heart and you don't get it down. If you have, let's see, my grandson asked me a few weeks ago when I was working on this book, I was finishing up, he said, is it fun for you to write? And I said, no, it's not really fun. It's always sort of hard for me. I forgot exactly what I said, but it's such an amazing feeling to get my work done for the day. And that's what I hope this writing will give you. Some of you I know hope to be published, and you think that if you got published, you will have instantly great self-esteem and most of your problems will be solved, let alone probably making a small fortune and getting the respect of your family finally at the ripe old age of 57 or whatever. And none of that will happen. It won't happen. It's an inside job. If you, the respect is inside, and the writing life can give that to you. For you to do your writing as a debt of honor every day for a little while, even though it's hard and you're not in the mood, will give you that respect. And it'll give you that way of life. It'll give you a life that is immersed in other writers. I'm going to really hope later on that you will form a little writing group. Hold on one sec. I hope you will start to read interviews by writers you love on the craft of writing and the why and the wherefore and the how of writing. And this is going to give you something you may have always dreamed of. And you may or may not get published. If you do, there are a number of published writers here. Terry Tate's great book, A Crooked Smile, you can get it Book Passage. There are a couple other people here with published books, and it's fantastic. It's amazing. It's a dream come true. And it's not the fantasy. It's like real life. And then you feel really small and cringy because you just want people to buy your book. And you know what? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I published my last book in COVID, and it was very hard. I didn't get to go from city to city, getting people, begging them to buy my book in person. And I was usually offer people a chance to see the tattoo on my left calf with the purchase of each hardbound book. And I couldn't do that. And I didn't sell nearly as well as I have before. And it was weird and disappointing. And of course, I thought, the jig is up, the well is run dry, but it is just the nature of publishing. And I'm telling you that because if you think the reward is out there waiting for you, it's really not. The reward is in the writing. And I want to help you be able to get started. It's just really the most wonderful feeling deep inside of you. And, you can always narrate your story if it turns out writing doesn't work. You hate writing. I know people who do. You can come to a Square One studio. You can record into an old Radio Shack tape recorder. You can get your stories down on paper. But if for a certain kind of person, it actually is about writing it down, typing it up in dribs and drabs or long swatches. And maybe you are this kind of person. So let's start with starting. The memoirist Abigail Thomas wrote a chapter called Starting in her latest book. It's called Still Life at 80. You can also get that autographed at Book Passage. So let me just read you this. Starting. I longed to be a writer. How did anybody do it? Who was I? I thought a real writer had something to say, something important and serious. I didn't know anything that mattered. Worse, I couldn't make a story come together in my head. Where to start? How to finish? My problem was I was trying too hard and giving up too quickly. My problem was I thought you had to know what you were doing. Nonsense. Listen to this. You just have to start. I give assignments, this is still Abigail. I give assignments in my writing classes because it's hard to make something up out of a clear blue sky. 2 pages is all I ask, and it doesn't have to be a story. It doesn't have to be in anything. It can contain a character who shows up out of breath. It can contain a lake and a bunch of swans. There can be conversation. There can be silence. It can take place entirely in the dark. I have learned we do better when we're not trying so hard. There is nothing more deadening to creativity than the grim determination to write a story. At the very least, assignments can provide a writer with a nicely stocked larder and some notion of where the mind goes when it's off its leash. And once in a while, if we're lucky, an assignment helps you find the side door into a story you've been staring too directly in the eye. Write 2 pages that begin with the sentence, "This is a lie I've told before." Okay, please, everybody out there, write that down. That is a great prompt. I want you to write that down, and I'll tell you another one of her great prompts from Still Life at 80. Write down 9 things you've forgotten. I forgot 3rd grade. I forgot who went to Girl Scout camp with me. I forgot that. I forgot 9 things. And then write 9 things you remember. I remember this. I remember that. I remember my 3rd grade teacher's car. I remember. Then you've got 18 things to write about, Okay, but my favorite prompt of all, there's great ones online. Just write great writing prompts and you'll find something that will help you start. But my favorite is from Mark Yaconelli. Okay, it's 4 words. There was a tree. Okay, write that down. When I heard this, when I heard Mark say this, I clutched my chest. It brought up so many memories of childhood trees, trees I'd climbed, trees I'd hidden from bullies behind, trees I fell from, trees I leaned against while I was writing or reading. Mark's written a tremendous book on storytelling. It's Yaconelli, Yaconelli, called Between the Telling and the Listening. And it's absolutely the most inspiring book on storytelling and groups of storytellers. And it will be incredibly inspiring for you, I promise. Some of you are writing fiction. And you need to know about plot and characters and setting, and we'll get to that. Some of you are writing memoirs and you need to know other things. Some of you have been published. Most of you haven't been. Maybe you used to really love writing when you were in high school or college, and then life reared its ugly head and you started working, you raised a family, you did whatever, and you haven't gotten back to it and you want to start again. So the challenge today is that I don't want to bore any of you with too much information that is specific to any one genre. And I can sum up everything you need to know with one sentence by my friend Randy, who's a screenwriter. Actually, after you hear it, you can probably log off and just go watch, Selling Sunset for the rest of the afternoon. She said, tell me a story, make me care. Okay. I know nothing about poetry, so I can't give much advice about that. But tell me a story, make me care. That's your job if you're going to be a writer. I read something online and I printed it out, but I forgot to print out the name of the author. So I'm just going to read it to you. It's a writer's job to be curious, to observe, to question, to try and better understand and give language to some of the vast and varied ways of being alive in the world. The fear that I will fall short, that I will fail to convert my ideas in a way that resonates with readers is real and ever present, but I have realized that it is also part of the draw and the ongoing challenge. We want to write stuff with meaning, right? And we want to write well. What does that even mean? What does that mean to write well? What is good writing? So for me, the miracle of reading good writing is that I don't say, God, that's good writing. It's just a direct transmission from the reader, from the writer to me, or for you to the people that you hope to read your stuff. I'm not marveling at the choice of words. I'm not stumbling over stuff. I'm not trying to figure out this or that or who did what when. Why did she insert that in then? I want the flow of narrative that flows through life through the eyes of a clever and careful observer who's seeing stuff that I can't see because I'm not in their world, and describe for me what they're seeing and feeling and hearing. It's another kind of total immersion. And I can be delighted by virtuosic writing, but it has to be in honor of the story. Okay, so how do we write? I always teach these writing workshops with my grandson's classes, and I started in kindergarten. And instead of writing about shitty first drafts, I wrote about poopy first drafts. But so I had a class of 25-year-olds, and I told them every single thing I know about writing, but with really simpler language. And my grandson, Jax, came up to me afterwards. He just was doubled over with mortification. He said, "Oh, Nana, that was terrible." I said, "What?" He said, "You told us you were going to teach us how to write a book, but you only taught us how to write a page." And that's really what I can teach you to do today. And then you can maybe write more and more and more and more and more of them and find some shape. So the most important thing is for my kindergartners and my 80-year-olds is you just got to stop writing. You got to stop not writing. You got to stop not writing. You know, every day you might be not writing, and that's the main thing you got to change. I taught all these for, oh, you could ask Elaine, but 20 years at Book Passage, these classes of 50 people. And in fact, that's where Terry Tate got her start, as just a writing student who then got a writing group. And for years they met at Book Passage and had, you know, glass of wine or coffee or a treat, and they shared pages with each other. But she started there because she started to write, and in other words, to stop not writing. And the other students were spending about a third of their class time explaining to me why they didn't have time to write, or why they really had never been that good at it, and why and they were retired, or they didn't have an office, or the kids were moving out next year, and then they'd probably start writing then. And I said, no, you won't. You're either going to start writing right now, or you're not. It's just not going to happen, and life is going to swirl by. It's going to run by like crazy greyhound dogs, and you're not going to have told your stories, the stories of your deepest love and your hardest patches of time that love brought you through somehow, that grace flew in, or grace spritzed you like spiritual WD-40. And that's the best story of all, you know, that we fall, we can't see, we're scared, we're defeated. Something happens. There's a knock on the door, or a memory floats into our head like a goldfish or whatever, and we get back up and we go on. And here we are now together. So that's my favorite story of all. And the other thing is that no one cares if you write. You know, so you had better. I believe you care if you're right, because you're here and you paid to be here. So so you want to, and that's the main thing. And it's hard. And where do you start? What is sufficiently engaging to keep you at it? Well, start with childhood. Start with there was a tree. Or start with tell me 9 things you forgot. Start with childhood. Start with a legal pad. I love those yellow legal pads because they're so much longer than regular writing, and just scribble down every single thing you can remember from childhood. It doesn't have to be anything you're going to get to or write about. For me, holidays are really, really good for assignments for myself later. Holidays tend to trigger a lot of memories. Oh my God, you're not going to believe this, but Katie, who is the world's most wonderful assistant, has arrived with my iPad and given it to Reese, and now I'm going to be able to read a little bit more easily. So start with childhood, start with holidays. Your first holiday memory is probably 4 years old. Start with school, start with kindergarten, start with 3rd grade, start with on the blacktop. Who did you sit with? What were your lunches like? Who made your lunch? I wrote about school lunches in Bird by Bird. If your dad made your lunch, it was probably not a good thing. It probably meant you couldn't trade it to the other kids because he would have put butter on it. You don't put butter on a 2nd grade sandwich. It doesn't go. You put a little mayonnaise, little lettuce, 1 slice of something. Anyway, so I need the print a little bigger. Sorry. I'm so sorry that you're here for this kind of collapse of my system. But anyway, Flannery O'Connor said, if you survive childhood, you have enough to write about for the rest of your life. And I would add that you've all come through 3 years of COVID, and this was a once in a lifetime experience, and you have plenty to write about. You were faced with like enforced intimacy and imprisonment, and with yourself, and maybe a couple of other people. And one way of looking at intimacy is the phrase "into me I see." And you know, what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your closest person? I bet some of it was dark and weird and slightly appalling, and you hadn't realized how loudly your husband ate bacon and how really unacceptable that was. And this is exactly the stuff that I want to write about just how crazy you are, because I'm just as crazy, and I'm just as sweet, and I'm just as kind of dark and odd and peculiar. And I love your version of our story. Flannery O'Connor also wrote read Mystery and Manners. That's the Flannery O'Connor collection of essays in which she writes a lot about writing. And I started in Elaine's classes in 1990 with an infant, 1989 with Elaine raising the infant. Well, I told them to buy this Flannery O'Connor book, Mystery and Manners. She wrote about finishing these stories. She was really young, really precocious. She lived in red dirt. I forgot what's deep southern town. And she took her stories to the old lady down the street at the far end. And about a week later, the old lady walked slowly back up this red dirt road and handed them to her and said, "Them stories just gone and shown you how some people would do." And that's all we have to write about, is what some people will do. All evidence and good advice and common sense to the contrary, what you have done, what I have done, what your fictional characters have done. The thing is, it really has to have happened even if you made it up. And that sounds very paradoxical, but the reader has to trust the truth of a story, that the people in it were really experiencing this event. Even if you made them and the event up, we have to believe that it really happened. And I think your characters will get you that information if you listen to it, if you listen to each character, and if you pay attention and you don't try to get them to do something that would just be so fabulous if they did, or say something that would be so great that they would have never said. Some of you have read my second novel called Rosie, and in it, there's a very depressed alcoholic woman, Rosie's mother, named Elizabeth Ferguson. And it was my second book, and I'd written, my first book was about my father's brain cancer, so I really didn't want people to think I was a depressive. And so I kept having her say this stuff that was really witty or ironic, and she's great. She's one of my favorite characters ever, but she wouldn't have said this stuff. And on the fourth or fifth draft, I had to go and take it out. What you tell us has to have happened, even if you make it up, okay? And you don't have to know for sure whether it works or not, because we're going to talk later about giving your work to other people to help you with, and they'll be able to say, "I love this." And they might say, "Did this really happen?" And you might say, "No," or you might say, "Sort of." And you might say, "Some of it did," or "It's based on something that did." Whatever. The thing is that your reader has to believe it. You can't have your reader with their arms crossed, sort of bitterly going, I don't buy it. Okay, and the main problem you're going to have with getting your work on paper is a perfectionism. It's the main obstacle to writing. It is the voice of the oppressor. It will make you crazy your entire life. It makes me crazy. It made me crazy up until Tuesday night when I sent this book off that has a lot of parts of a lot of things in it that could be and will be better, because you get to keep writing drafts of it, and you do get to get a lot of help, which you may not have heard yet and which we'll talk about later. But the fear of being judged or criticized or shamed, for me, is the biggest boulder in the past. So I think in Bird by Bird, there's a chapter on writing letters, so that instead of writing a short story that you hope or believe will be published someday in the New Yorker, you just write a letter to the very safest person in your life. You can write it to me. You could say, "Dear Annie, I just really want to tell you about the years when my children were drinking. I want to tell you about my first marriage in Beirut. I want to tell you about my years I spent in I just want to tell you this before it's all lost, okay?" Now, I wouldn't read it and go, "Really? This is just so, it's so long. I mean, I think you could have done this in a couple pages instead of a epic poem or something." I would start to read and I go, God, good for you. Good for you. Keep going. So I said in Bird by Bird that you should write to my brother Steve-O, because he's the very sweetest, safest person literally on earth. And Reese is here and he will validate that. And so if you write and he's really tall and he teaches special ed and he's gentle and he's funny, he's kind of very Irish. And I would recommend, if you're stuck and you're feeling kind of cramped and clutched and silent, just write your stories to my brother Steve-O, and just write, Dear Steve-O, Annie said it would be okay if I told you about what it was like for me, my first marriage, what it was like for me when I finally found love. If I told you this idea that I have, I don't know where it's going, but it might be, it might turn out to be a novel. So listen, no one in your family is going to be glad to hear that you're working on a memoir. Okay, so they don't need to know for a very, very long time. We'll talk about libel later, because the every single thing in you is going to be telling you not to write your stories, not to get your memories down on paper. All those old voices that told you you must be crazy to have thought they were so dysfunctional, all those old voices that told you that what happened in the family stayed in the family, all those voices that, you know, that manifested as a long bony finger coming down from the clouds and telling you that you signed a contract at 4 years old to keep these family secrets. Those voices are going to silence you till the end of your days, until you break through by starting, by scribbling, by getting down on that yellow legal pad, every single thing you can remember. Okay, you own every single thing that happened to you. If they wanted you to write more warmly about them, they should have behaved better. So you just do it. I don't want to sound like a Nike ad, but you own it, get it down, write it down now, write it down when you leave class today, and you can figure out everything later. You can figure out what you can use, what you can't use, you can obviously turn it all into fiction. There are a lot of things to do to work with very dark memories that would hurt or scare the people in your family, but you don't need to be silenced by them now. Just get it down on paper. And so another piece of advice that I wrote out to myself and have taped to my computer is, write what you want to come upon, because you want us, all of you out there want us to come sit around the campfire to hear your story. I think it's probably an incredible story. What is the story that you want to tell? Well, if you resonate to stories that are historical fiction, or that are confessional, that are addiction stories, that have multiple narrators, that are thrillers, that are whatever, that is very good information from deep inside of you, from your soul, that you love this, and maybe you want to try that. So I asked myself, what would I like to come upon? I wanted to come upon information that would be good for my son and grandson to come upon after I'm gone, when things get very weird. Sometimes, I wanted to come upon how we make a comeback when we feel that we've lost something that is unsurvivable. How do we get that sense of redemption when we've come to feel that our life, that so much has been squandered, or that we are really whatever? What do you want to come upon? Do you want to? That's a great story, how somebody felt like they had wasted it, or they had been two-faced, or they had made so many mistakes. I bet 90% of the parents here today have a lot of stuff swirling around their spirit about all the mistakes they made with their children, and the guilt, or the grief, or the confusion, or the rage. Get it all down. It is raw material. it's just like pulling all this rich black clay out of the river and putting it on a big table and spreading it out and starting to work with it, starting to shape it, starting to pick all the pebbles out, starting to a mic just fell out of my ear. I'm not sure if that's meaningful or not, but okay, no, they're indicating it's not. And you can work with this stuff. The lie will tell you need to know what you're doing. What is this? Where is it all going? It's a lie. And you can turn that lie off. Neil, my husband, is going to come do a 10-minute session when I need to take a short break. But his work in the world, you can find out about it at his website. It's called shapesoftruth.com. And his work is with the inner critic. It's with this internalized parasite from when we're 4 and 5 years old that told us that we should stay very scared and under the control of the others. And it kept us alive. We didn't run out into the street. We didn't swim past our ability to stay afloat. But, you know, in my case, I'm almost 70 and I'm very good with traffic safety and swimming. I'm very good with good sense in the ocean. And I don't need that critical voice, the inner critic, to be saying, oh, you can't tell that. You can't say that. No, they'll never speak. No, you don't need that voice anymore. And just to kind of sum up this inner critic stuff, he's taught me to notice it and to say, oh, it's you again, and then to get on with my work. So let's get on to how we tell a story. But just remember, just to repeat myself, you own every single thing that happened to you. And figure it out is not a good slogan. You don't know what you need. You don't know what you need to know what you're doing. You don't know how it's going to shape itself. You don't know how it ends. You don't know it. You don't need to know. None of the writers you love know what they're doing when they start out. You find out what you're doing by writing a really shitty first draft. Okay, so a story, a memoir, a screenplay, a novel, whatever, a journal, it starts somewhere in space and time. And you step onto the path besides the writer. If you're the writer, you're the travel guide. If you're the reader, you step in next to them and they're going to narrate for you. Ethan Kanin, who I love, you should read Emperor of the Air and everything he's written at Canin. But he taught his students at the Iowa Writers Workshop, the most illustrious in the country, that you should never write out of revenge, whereas I think you just need no other reason. But you do need to set it in time and space. So, I mean, I think to write out of revenge just gives me so much hope because these are great stories, the stories of people who behaved really, really badly. Sometimes it's about times that I've behaved really badly, things that I've done that I would do anything to undo, that I'm not able to, but to write about them and to look for the redemption, to look for the healing, to look for, you know, Rumi, a Persian mystic poet, said, through love, all pain will turn to medicine. And I think of this a lot as a writer because most of my stories begin in a lot of pain. They need to begin in time and space. Something happened, probably that somebody did something to me that was just so awful, such a betrayal or such a ambush. And I write about it, but it's got stuff on its mind. It's tugging on my sleeve. It's wondering if I might stay with the pain or stay with the memory or just stay with it and see if it beckons me into another direction. And that's what I do on paper. It turns out that it isn't something that took place 5 weeks ago at the Safeway at Red Hill. It actually is something that happened when I was 5 years old in kindergarten, and it just triggered that. And I don't need to be mad at the person in Safeway because really what they did was totally innocuous. But what happened to me when I was 5 years old scared me and scarred me. And that's what I need to write about. So you need to trust somehow that if you stay with this stuff in grounded in time and space, that it will take you maybe to other times and other spaces and other ages where there was some information that 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 the great universal spirit, who we call Gus, couldn't get to you any other way. So, like, for instance, I was really mad at somebody for putting too much responsibility on me, and me making a big mistake for other people to see. When I was in kindergarten, I was really great with kids, and my teacher had a mother and a student with a baby, and she also had a baby. And I was 5 years old. I probably weighed 40 pounds, and I was given responsibility for wheeling this baby around in a red wagon while she had a mutual conference with my mother, the mother of the baby, and the other student. And the baby fell out of the little red wagon. I thought I had killed it, right? And everybody ran and came, and the baby was fine. I mean, I don't know how it turned out, but let's just say it wasn't that big a deal. But that was what the memory at the Safeway Red Hill triggered. And that turns out to be a really, really powerful story of why did you put me in that? Why did that happen to me? Well, it did. And so there's a story, there's a material, there's 4 pages that I scribble down that turn out to be a long paragraph that I completely love, that I wouldn't have gotten to any other way. Okay, so I'm going to kind of tell you about kind of recap some of the bird by bird themes and chapters that I think are most valuable. So if you've ever heard me before, you've heard me talk about them. And if you have, maybe it's a refresher course, and it never hurts me to hear them again. It's funny, Reese and Sam here at Square One Studio about 4 months ago or so, maybe longer, recorded me reading Bird by Bird for the first time. It was recorded 25 years ago by an actress, and I'd always recorded it, always wanted to record it in my own voice. It's my book. And the publishers had never been willing to shell out, and I finally got them to. And so we recorded for a couple days, and I read it for the first time in my life since 1994. And so I'm just seeing this material again. It's funny, for the first time all those years. And some of it I thought, oh, that's not bad. Or how did I think of that? Wow, I like that. And other times, with Reese or Sam, there's going, oh my God, where were my editors? But anyway, there's probably 6 or 7 really main points, and I'm going to recap them here. Some of you are new, I hope, and not sick of me yet. Okay, the first thing is short assignments. It's so overwhelming. That's Bird by Bird. It comes from a story when my older brother was in 5th grade and had his first term paper due. In California, your first term papers are 4th grade, your first research papers. Up until then, you've always had that paper that has lines on the bottom half for your story, and then a blank half. The top part is half, so you can do your illustration. But in 4th grade, you do sort of a little research, and you turn it into a 10-page term paper. And one of the topics was birds. I mean, all California 4th graders. And so my older brother hated school, and he hadn't started, and it was due the next day. He'd had the whole semester. He hadn't mentioned to my parents, he hadn't done any of the research. And so he had all of the books. He had all these magazine clippings with birds. He had he had everything. The brads, you young people don't know about, but it's how you clip together pages that had paper punched holes in them. And my dad put his arm around him, and my brother was crying. My brother was a tough guy, and he didn't cry. And my dad said, just take it bird by bird, buddy. You study up about a chickadee, and then you write it in your own words, and you cut out a picture. And then you study about pelicans, and then you write it in your own words. And then you draw a picture for us. And that really, for all of the people here today, that's how we write. It's bird by bird. Otherwise, it's just so overwhelming, to think, oh, I want to write a book about, I want to write a book that, about the history of of the traumatic response be a therapist. It's you can't do that. You could maybe write about one therapist working with one patient, as in the great book by our friend MC called Unbroken, which Book Passage is at a great event with. You can get personalized copies of Unbroken, which is a new response to trauma, that you're not broken by it, and that there is a redemptive and transformative path through experiencing what happened to you. But you can't write a whole book about old and new responses to trauma. Where do you start? Start with one story, one page. You write one page a day, you've got a book at the end of the year. But it's hard probably for you to believe that people that we love, the writers we love most, Barbara Kingsolver, who just won the Pulitzer Prize, or now my mind's blank and I can't think of a single other book I've ever written, but not a single writer, Doctorow, I'm going to quote E.L. Doctorow's great books. None of these books started with the writer knowing what they were going to do. Ragtime, obviously, E.L. Doctorow knows he's going to write about flappers and the ragtime and the speakeasies and the houses of prostitution and the jazz and the jazz and the jazz. It's going to be called ragtime. So he knows that, but I bet you he doesn't know a single scene. And he starts putting it together. He starts going places where he can see it firsthand. He starts reading, he starts looking at pictures. He goes to libraries, and you do it bird by bird by bird. And one way that has helped me remember to do this is I've always taught my students to imagine that you start a book where I am. This is the first lily pad where our story starts. And the story is usually about a bunch of people who start at one end of something. So in this case, we'll call it a lily pond. It could be at a campus, a reunion, a 30th reunion at Harvard, or Marin Academy. It could be at a family reunion. It could be at an office in the city. It could be on a ferry. It could be wherever. But we start here. You need to start somewhere. We need to be able to see. And between me and Katie, who's about 30 feet away, maybe the story is going to have 6 lily pads, 6 really major stopping points. And I'm going to move in a not completely linear way over to the other side. And Katie is where the story ends. Katie is where I'm going to take my reader out of the lily pond. And it makes it so much easier. So last year I had this audio visual set up, but all it was a photo of my office. Do you have it, Reese? No. It's an office where I have these huge sheets of paper. They're poster sized graph paper. You can get them at Kinko's or anywhere. And on them I would draw like 6 huge circles, 6 circles. And I would start off, I'd know kind of where I was going to start off. Okay, this is going to start off. The new book starts off with this thing that we do at my church. My church is St. Andrew Presbyterian. It's at 11 o'clock and it's in Marin City, and you can Zoom it, and you're all welcome. And I hope to see most of you tomorrow. So, and our church started giving out these purple bags for the homeless. It was a ministry, and it had shampoo and body wash and an old style pork pie hat and a handy wipes and pens and socks, bombas. And I got a bunch of those. And I thought, this is so ridiculous. But I decided to give them away. They say when all else fails, follow instructions. So I started giving away, and it was so funny and touching to I had 3 bags, and to have 3 profound encounters with 3 homeless people, one of who was deeply and somewhat hostilely confused by my efforts to give him one of these purple bags of love as I thought of them. And I just know that's where I'm going to start. Well, where do I start? Well, I start at my home. I leave my house. I'm clutching one of these purple bags. and what's on the mind of this character? Well, my church is doing it, and it's very sweet. It's incredibly embarrassing. I'm just going to see what happens, right? Curiosity. My husband in his book Shapes of Truth writes about curiosity as kind of the path to God, of being curious about it all again. What will it be like? What will happen? What am I going to see? How can I be there for the other person? How is the other person paradoxically going to really be there for me? And so that's the first lily pad. The second lily pad is, aha, my first contestant. I see this guy I sort of know and who's a local named Tom, and he loves me. He's very gentle and kind. And I see him sitting on the path in my neighborhood 2 blocks away. So I head right, that's my second lily pad, is trying to share with Tom these items that would really better be used if you had actual bathroom or running water. It's very sweet stuff. And the voices inside of me, the inner critic saying, well, then what? What does this have? What's the information that you think would be so valuable for Sam or Jax after you're gone, in this story of people being very confused by your purple bags and the one guy being almost, being kind of frightened by you. And it's like, that's not my business to figure out. I think the story knows what it is. I think what got me curious about it knows what the story is. And so I wrote that one story, and it came out really badly. It came out full of kind of missionary zeal. It came out funnier than it came out funny because I was so worried. I didn't want you to think I believe in this idea of serving and missionary work and all that. And I do, even though I do. Now, Tom comes up with a couple great lines, I'll tell you one line from the book. You can steal it. I don't care. He said, oh, Annie, kindness is how I feel the movement of God in the world, right? I said, hey, Tom, can I have that? And I did. So, but there's like 6 points along the way. And so I have big circles and I write in pencil. And a lot of you are doing this on computer. And you can ask Terry Tate. I have been begging people for 30 years to try paper and pencil as an experiment, because that sound of graphite on paper is a sacred sound. It is a sound that connects us with generations and centuries of people telling the same stories with different details that are the stories that are on your heart to tell. So picture that poster and some circles on it. Anything you can think about, third lily pad, scribble it down way before you get to it. Maybe you have 2 of these poster sized sheets up there and you have 12 of them. There's 10 stories in this book plus a prelude. So I had 2 side by side. Oh my God, I want to write about community. I did Yom Kippur this year on Baker Beach with the fabulous Rabbi Sid Mintz from Temple Emmanuel. And I wanted to write about community because that's one thing I know for sure is a place of salvation and rest. And so, I didn't have it. So I just wrote it down like in number 8 and whatnot. And so trust me on this. If you can write down 8 or 10 places that you might want to land, you have some ideas, you don't know where they go. Maybe 2 of them will end up as 1. Maybe 1 of them will end up as 2. Figure it out is not a good slogan. As you can figure out, well, on this one lily pad, we just went to Cuba. This stuff happened there. I wanted to write about it. Scary stuff, magical stuff. I just put that down as number 9, Cuba. And then I started having a million memories and thoughts, quotes, and I just scribble it down in pencil because I love pencil, because I'm old and that's just what I came up with. So, okay, so I know this all sounds daunting, and I'm glad that you're going to all get a link to this so you can either go over it or delete it all, but take what you like and leave the rest. This is how I get my work done. So, one thing I started doing about a year ago that I really loved was giving myself a writing pod of an hour. And I wouldn't want to write. I'd have a lot of other stuff to do. I would never know what I'm doing. And I'm never in the mood. And I always have really shaky self-esteem. But I'd say, we're going to do a pod. And the pod comes with a bribe. We're going to do an hour. And then you can watch 15 minutes of MSNBC. Or I'll make you the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the food of heaven. So in an hour long pod, you can only get 45 minutes of writing done. That's the secret, is that if you set aside 2.5 hours of writing, you can get about an hour and 45 minutes done. If you set aside 3 hours, just over 2 hours. So an hour's pod is 45 minutes of writing, and it will blow your mind. If you have that kind of benevolent pressure on you to write for 45 minutes, to write for an hour, you're going to be amazed by how much you get down on paper. Now, I mentioned something last year that people loved by the wonderful novelist Curtis Settenfield, who has a new book out that, of course, has hit the bestseller list because everything she writes does. And she wrote a list of things that really, really helped her with writing. And I want to just read those to you. Step 1. Look at your calendar and decide in advance which day or days and time or times you can write. An ideal schedule might be 2 hours each on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but whatever you can manage is fine. Though your story also can be any length you want. Short stories encapsulate everything from flash fiction, flash fiction, which can be just a few paragraphs, to Alice Munro's epic 70-pagers, but it's useful to have a rough idea of how long it will take to write. Different writers set different daily quotas for themselves, shooting for 500 words, say, which in my case, I use big print because my eyes are going. I use 14-point font, and you will probably use 12. So you set 500 words, page and a half, or 250 or 1,000, which would be about 3. Now there's writing that is so small that I cannot possibly see that. Okay, I'm just going to skip it. Oh, wait. Okay, wait. It's right. I have it here. No, so I'm not there. So you set any length of time that you think to, and she says to break your writing day up into Pomodoro Pomodoro technique that breaks your workday into 25-minute chunks. Then somebody is going to help me. What page is that? Oh, I don't know. Okay, wait. I'm just going to go on. Okay, you can keep track of your progress in the space it right. Okay, keep going, Reese. I'm going to come back to Curtis Sittenfield because I've temporarily lost it. But okay, decide where you're going to write and decide what has to happen so that when it's time, you're ready. That's the most important step that she says in it, but we may be able to provide more. Oh, I don't know why this ends up being so small. Yeah, that's the main thing, is decide when you're going to write, when you can write. And she talks about the Pomodoro techniques that breaks your workday into 25-minute chunks, but to get a certain number of pages done. And, know where you're going to write. No writer, not a single writer I've known in 50 years of doing this has gone by the idea of, I'll have inspiration, or I'll know what to do when it's time. Oh, da-da-da. You know when you're going to write, you know where you're going to write. And Hemingway famously left off at a good place so that he would not have to sit down with, thanks, sweetie, with blank page. He'd leave off at the end of the day with where he was going to start up. So that's not a bad idea too. I gave a talk once on what inspires me to write, and on inspiration. I was at Squaw Valley, and I was raised by a writer, and my dad sat down at 5:30 every single morning, 5 days a week, rain or shine, hangover, cold, head cold, and he just wrote. And we'd hear him tap, tap, tapping on the old Olympia. And you did it by prearrangement with yourself. You don't wait for inspiration. I gave this talk on inspiration. I said, what inspires me is like debt, mental illness, and the desire for revenge, and greatness and fame. And no writer that I know waits for inspiration. You just sit down, You made a deal. You can sit down at 9 tomorrow morning. You can sit down at 9 o'clock tomorrow night when the kids are in bed, and you're going to do it. You have an hour. You have an hour. So you have an hour pod. You're going to get 45 minutes of writing done about that camp you went to when you were 14, and your mind is going to be blown. And I can tell you this too. This is another pond image. Once you get in, you're there, and you will almost certainly go for much longer. So anyway, okay, the second thing after bird by bird and short assignments is shitty first drafts. Every single writer I've ever known has written unbelievably bad no, that's not true. Well, will I be able to remember her name? Who wrote Memento Mori? Memento Mori. Risa, look it up. God, my mind's gone blank. She was an English writer during the Second World War, and she felt she was just such a automatically good writer that she felt like she had dictaphone headsets on, and she just took dictation from God. But I just think that is very aggressive and ugly, and not a single other writer I know ever felt that. You find out what you're writing by writing it. Muriel Spark, she wrote The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie too. She's a great writer. I mean, no one reads her anymore, but Memento Mori is amazing. Jean Spark, anyway, Muriel Spark, Miss Jean Brodie. So for the rest of us, we end up with these, in my case with Rosie, I can talk to you about, it was about 350 pages, and it was bits and pieces and passages and chapters, and they were written in this kind of hodgy-podgy way, and I thought I had kind of a plot, and so then I did a second draft of it, and I tried to make it seem like I really had a plot, and I needed the money, so I sent it off to my editor at Viking Penguin, who was named Cork Smith. I was 25. I was still drinking. And this is the day when, this is the late 70s, and there's no email, there's no text. So I waited days and days to get a letter from him, and it said, "This is the most painful letter I've ever had to write." It didn't work. The book didn't work. The characters didn't work. And most of all, there was no story. It was hodgepodgey. And he said, this is a book that you put away in the drawer and you get on to your next one. As I say, luckily I was still drinking and I got through the next couple of days. But the thing was, I did believe in these characters, Rosie and Elizabeth Ferguson, and I wanted to write the book for them. And I thought maybe I will have to put it away someday, but I want to give it a try. And so what I did was I tore the whole thing apart, section by section and partial section by partial section. And I was renting a room at a huge house that had a huge living room, and I laid out each section like garden tile. And this had to lead to this. A had to lead to B, had to lead to C, had to lead to D. If I didn't know what D was, I knew what E was. I left a marker page there. I really didn't know what happened. I don't know where this friend comes from. And I kind of started to find the story. The story started helping me find it. And it started saying, oh, excuse me, this isn't part of this story. Maybe we'll use this somewhere else, but you have to take it out. And, half of creativity is taking stuff out. It's so painful to cut it. Oh, I should sit up better. Okay, so Jessica Mitford, the great writer from Oakland, who wrote The American Way of Death, said, as her most important writing advice, you have to kill your little darlings. And it means you have to go through it, and you just have to take out descriptions and patches of dialogue and memory that you just love more than anything, vocabulary words you use that you just are just so in love with, but that I'm very smart. I'm a dropout. I used to be very smart, and I don't know that word. And I would love it if you use a word that I know, right? And I take, I find words I hear. I just did it Tuesday night before I sent off my book. I took out a word that I don't even really know what it means, and I've been using it for 3 drafts, and I took it out, right? You have to kill your little darlings. And I did that, and I went through I amassed a small pile of material for another book that I actually wrote. And then I went through this garden tile narrative and I scribbled down where A starts and then ends. It ends at B. Where does B start and what happens? And it ends at C. What do the characters go through? How do we meet this new best friend? How does she arrive on the scene? Well, that's in D. D begins with a knock on the door, and Ray opens, Ray comes in and says, I'm going to be your new, I'm going to be your new best friend, and so on. And I really recommend that, that if you write a long, shitty first draft, maybe it's a short story, maybe it's 20 pages, separate it out until you can see how it hangs together. You have to have a structure. You don't have to, but your reader does. We insist on it. This is a way that worked for me, and you're all doing it on computer and you won't listen to me anyway. So maybe there's a way to do this on your computer, but to print out and section it off with paper clips so it can look, so you can look around at it, move stuff around. And it, it's going to be a pain in the neck, and it's kind of a setback, but it's a setback that's going to lead to a bursting forth again. You're going to go, oh my God, I just got it. Okay. Da-da. All right. So, let's see, what was I on? But anyway, I wrote my book. I wrote my book, Rosie, and I wrote another shitty draft of it, but I had the plot in place, right? And I published it, but it took this horrible letter, this horrible meeting with my editor, and all I can say is don't give up on the people you're writing about, especially if they're you. Just don't give up. My son, Sam, has "We Never Give Up" tattooed on his forearm. And I'd say that's about 85% of success in writing. Okay, I talked to you a little bit about the inner critic, the parasite that tells you you need to stay small and cramped, and it's best not to try to breathe too often. But in Bird by Bird, I wrote about K-Fucked Radio, which is this radio station that plays in the head of all writers. And out of it, it's got two speakers, a stereo. And out of one speaker said, it's really cool, and you love to write, and you love this story, you love your family, it was hard, and you want to write about it, you don't know if you want to publish it, but you've got this incredibly rich human regional material with some really funny characters in it, and you were going to write that. And then out of the other speaker comes that it's stupid and no one will care, and that it's not even that interesting, and that you were never a good writer, that wasn't your skill, and that what's the point, and you're old and you'll never get it published, right? So you've got to find a way when you sit down to calm that. A lot of you know about mindfulness techniques. You can find out about the inner critic at Shapes of Truth, and I'm just noticing it's like, oh, it's you again. The voice from childhood said, what happened in the family stayed in the family. What the voice from childhood said, oh, you're crazy. What you think you saw didn't even really happen. Your mother and I love each other very much. No, I would have never done or said that to your, no. And you get to quiet it and thank it for sharing and write the material that you feel in your being is your truth. You own it. It's yours. Get it down on paper. If you think something happened, if you remember something having happened, I believe it happened. Okay, so I hope that's enough for you. I always say this prayer when I start writing, or I often do. I say, help me stay out of my own way so I can write what wants to be right. Because when I can calm myself and just write badly, I mean, with the workshop I do with the little kids, I teach them how to write badly, because very little in the culture is teaching them to write freely. I have them scribble across pages with pencils to simulate writing so they look like they're writing, and then I have them write badly, anything at all, any words lined up together. And so if you can calm yourself, if you have a prayer or a mantra and you calm yourself and you just start then you are going to be able to activate your imagination. And now I want to just talk to you about imagination for a second. I know it sounds like we're in third grade, but it is really something extraordinary that will change your whole life again. I know you had incredible imaginations as children, and at some point you weren't graded on it, and it was no longer encouraged. What was encouraged was to read carefully and to answer the questions on the test, and the forward thrust of the American way. And but I need you to, if you want to be a writer, to break the rules of childhood and to waste more time and to stare off into space more often. And there used to be a word, Elaine would know this, and some of the grandmothers who are here today, who are my special friends, and they're all 80-ish or getting there like we all are, and they know the word wool gathering. It was very 40s and 50s, and it was slightly pejorative, and it meant kind of aimlessly and dreamily imagining stuff that didn't go with an assignment or a deadline. It was spacing out. It was staring off into space and thinking things and weird thoughts about nothing in particular, or how you would describe the new neighbors to your wife, and what the hugely overgrown Japanese maple that you really need to trim reminds you of, and that you blah, 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 blah. That's called wool gathering. And even though it is seemingly unproductive and keeping you from your writing, it's going to give you back memories and images and ideas in that mix. And the imagination, if you can begin to honor your imagination again and wool gather more, you don't take anything else away. But in this world that is spinning out of control, and the endless toxic data stream and internet and blah, 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 if you can touch back in with your inner world and that huge wild world of your imagination, I will really, really feel like you've been well served. That dreamy interior world, memories of your old dogs, memories of the walks you used to take your dogs on, you and your friends on the boulders at the beach at 7-year-olds when you still believed in unicorns and other magical imagery, and it's such a precious gift. So one thing to do is to read books by people with just tremendous imaginations, and they will give you permission to write like that. To write
Annie, sorry to interrupt, but people are putting in the chat group, how can I get a list of the books? And I don't want anyone to worry about it, because our classes manager is making the list and she's going to post it at the end. So everyone will
Where
be
can you
able
get
to
those
know.
books that will give you permission to use more imagination? Was that the question? Right. Okay, right off the bat, I'll tell you, Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, everything Kurt Vonnegut ever wrote, just start there. He's written 10 books that will change your whole life. So has Douglas Adams. My mind will go a little blank now, but during Neil's spiel, I will think more about it. I need Reese to go back to that page. Okay. So, when you were a kid, if you were having imaginative thoughts, dreamy thoughts, and wild escapades, or thinking about being in outer space or whatever, an adult would come along and clear his or her throat and say, don't you have something to do? Is your homework done? Is your room clean? And you need to get back the idea that you can sit and stare up into space. Carl Sagan said something that I love. I mean, Carl Sagan and Albert Einstein, I tell you, the two greatest scientists of maybe that whole century. And they said two things on imagination. One is imagination will often carry us to worlds that never were, but without it, we go nowhere. And Einstein said, the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. Okay, Reese, I want you to go down now to plot and character. Okay, wait, stop there. Index cards. There's gonna be time for everything. One of the most important ideas in Bird by Bird is index cards or notebooks. All of you that come to me in person, explain you're using your phones, and that's very nice. I'm not talking about using your phones right now. I'm talking about carrying paper around and pens and or a little notebook. I always gave my students those. So I'd go to the dollar store and buy 100 really small notebooks and hand them out. You're going to see stuff. You're going to see stuff in line at the express line. You're going to remember stuff that your Aunt Eleanor said or did when you were 4 years old. And, you know, Henry James said, a writer is someone on whom nothing is wasted. And if you trust that, which I do, stuff is going to come to you. It is just, if you open for business, you say, I am a writer now. I am writing. 5 days a week for an hour. I'm writing 3 days a week for 3 hours. So I am a writer, and I'm reading about writing. I'm reading my favorite writers on writing. You are a writer. That means you're open for business. And that means ideas are going to come to you. They're going to float into your head like goldfish, and you've got to get them down on paper. Okay, so I always had my students carry index cards and bits of paper, and you can or don't, but it has worked for me. And this book I sent off on Tuesday is my 20th book, and my dad taught me about index cards. What do you do with the index cards? You have stuff written on them that you would have lost otherwise. You would have not gotten it right. You would not have remembered it right. And then maybe you do incorporate that memory or whatever you wrote down on the index card into something you're writing. Maybe you don't. You don't need to figure it out. Figure it out. It's not a good slogan. Get it down on paper. When I was at living in Petaluma and writing Joe Jones, I was working at this little dive on the Petaluma River, and I was at the cash register one day, tiny dive. And these two teenage girls came up to me to pay, and they said, one of them said, I'm going to have to pay you like in total dimes. She had like a $15 bill. And she said, I'm going to have to pay you like in total dimes. And I said, wait 1 second. And I wrote it down. I'm going to have to pay you like in total dimes. Such a great line. And then I got a chance to kind of to edit Joe Jones about 10 years after it was published. And I did what I wanted to do, and I said they sent it to the publisher, sent it to their copy editor, and she'd cross this out, and she had written in instead, I'm going to have to pay you. I'm going to totally have to pay you with dimes, and it was like, what? That's not like rhythm and blues. The sentence was, I'm going to have to like pay you in total dimes, and I put it back, and we fought about it. Right, write it down the way you hear it. Write it down the way you overhear it. Write about the way you dreamt it. Wake up and write it down the way you heard it in your dream. I was in Cuba and I dreamt my best friend said to me, I'm breaking up with you. You're annoying and you're not lovable. And everybody thinks this. And then she repeated, everybody. I woke up, I wrote it down. I knew there was a great story in there somehow because it's everybody's fear. We're annoying and we're not lovable and that we're too needy, right? I knew that was a story, and there was, and you'll have to wait till next April to read it, but I wrote it down verbatim. That voice inside of you will say, oh, if it's important, you'll remember it. You got to do what Neil does and say, oh, it's you again, you know? Okay, so the next thing I want to share with you is one thing about writing is that you've got to get people to turn the page. How do you make things be interesting? Well, if you're writing so that other people, it doesn't matter if you're writing journals or if you're writing a history for your grandchildren, which I really, really think is just the most valuable writing you can do. But if you're trying to get something published, you got to get the reader to want to turn the page. And to do that, you need tension. You create that tension by drawing characters for us who we're really pulling for and letting us know who they are and what they care about and what they stand to lose or gain. That is really important. That's the tension. Someone you love may lose. They may lose their marriage. They may lose their faith. They may lose this job that has been all they ever dreamt of. I want to talk about plot and character because this is where you create the tension. this is how you get people to turn the page. Let's start with plot. Okay, so plot is the main story of your book or your short story. Plot grows out of character. You do not want characters to serve as pawns for some plot you've dreamed up that would sound good as a synopsis in, TV guide. Your characters are why we care about your book, why we care about your short stories, your screenplays. And so in Bird by Bird, I wrote, think of a hockey player. There had better be a puck out there on the ice or he is going to look pretty ridiculous. Something influences these people, the player and us, the person, the parent, the child, and they and we influence others. And things start to happen. That's what the plot is. That's Flannery O'Connor saying, these are the stories of what some people will up and do. So you get it down. And then you ask yourself, what happens next? And then you lurch forward, what happens next? You keep trying to move the story forward like a puck in an ice hockey field. John Gardner's written a book, get Elaine to get you a copy of this. It's called The Art of Fiction. It's just stunning. Oh, he died way too early. But he said in it, writing is creating a dream. And the dream must be vivid and continuous. And so that means every step of the way, the dream has to hang together. In the dream, you don't suddenly put your hands on your hips and go, well, wait a minute, I've never met Rosalind Carter. I don't think she'd be at my house shooting heroin with me. In the dream, you might think, oh, this is funny because I don't know Rosalind Carter and I've been clean and sober for almost 37 years. But in the dream, you go with it. You want Rosalind Carter to feel comfortable in your house, right? So you ask her if she wants water. It's continuous and it's vivid. So you keep making these pages as vivid as you can. That means you bring in the senses. You bring in what you can see, what you can hear. What can you smell? What can you smell in that room or out on the field or out on the ice? If I asked all of you here today to write me a story about two married people who are headed for divorce unless something unforeseen happens, you'll write me several hundred different stories. Some will be set in Marin, some might be set in Ulaanbaatar or Paris or Hollywood or New York, but every single one of them will be about life and connection and the heart and love and loss and possibly rage, grief. Some of them will be sort of funny and some will just bristle with drama. But the formula for almost all of our stories is setup. People are like A Marriage Story. I thought was a great setup, that movie. Two movies I can tell you I thought were brilliant setups for fiction writers. One was it was either The Marriage Story or Marriage Story with Scarlett Johansson. And the other one was a TV series with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant. And it might have been called The Undoing, The Unraveling, The Undoing. It doesn't matter. Risa, look it up. But it'll be easy to find if you Google TV series. It's a brilliant setup. The setup is almost always going to be, the narrative structure is going to be setup, build up, payoff. The setup tells us what the game is. The build up is where all the moves happen and all the scenes of intersection between your people happen, all their decisions and mistakes and whatnot. The payoff is where we discover what you were up to all along. So like with The Undoing or whatever it's called, was it called The Undoing? Oh, so excited. Yep. Thank you, Reese. It's called The Undoing. It starts off with a very elite, lovely, funny, charming New York City couple, Hugh Grant. We all want to be married to Hugh Grant. And they have a son who's, 12. And it's a lovely family. He's a doctor. He's a pediatrician, oncologist, very profound. And we see the school. We see her life. We see the boy in class. We see the other parents, the other mothers who come to the house one day, one of whom has got a little extra energy that maybe we're aware of. And you start to feel tense. And little by little, the story is unfolding, the background of these people, the And if you just watch that first hour, if you're writing a novel or a thriller, I think it's a really perfect setup. I'm surprised because I didn't think my Nicole Kidman needs were that big. But anyway, so that's a really good setup. So to I know I'm going really long today, and I want to be sure to get to everything. But you have to have us trust the character. You have to have us trust that each one of these small scenes and moments rings true to who you've created. I love location. A lot of the grandmothers who are here grew up in the South. I love when they tell me stories of that, of the rural and the city and the cooking, the kitchens and the churches and the you know the dances. And you write a lot, get it all down, and then take about 2/3 of it out. You must kill your little drawing, and then you'll have it. If you wrote this down, if you wrote those things down I just described, you would have something you could give your grandchildren or your nieces and your nephews or anyone and say, this is what it was like for me as a child. I love this idea of just trying to get small pieces right. The great Carolyn Shute, who's written a lot of novels, but for me, the great one is The Beans of Egypt, Maine, which will take you one Saturday to read. It's so stunning. But she said in an interview that she feels when she's writing that she's creating all these Christmas tree ornaments, like with each section, and each one is unique and as good as she can get it. And then when they're all assembled, she realizes they have to go on something. She has to go get a tree, and she has to go out into the forest of her imagination with a blindfold on, and she's got to cut it down with a spoon. So your tree is the structure. And the way I told you, finding it by putting all these sections down on paper, like a garden tile, and seeing what leads to what leads to A, what leads to A. We don't want really interesting, mystic, postmodern Japanese, erudite avant-garde writing. I mean, 3 of you here might enjoy that. The rest of us don't. We want you to tell us a story. Tell us your story. Tell us the story you dreamt up. But we don't want to be confused. Shirley Jackson famously said that a confused reader is an antagonistic reader. And so think of yourself as a tour guide. You're explaining to us and you're revealing to us what it's about. You're not you don't want us to think about how trippy a mind you have. You want us to meet your characters. You want us to get to know them. They're probably you. It may be that all of your characters are some facet of you. And so we're going to get to know them, and we're going to have to care about 1 or 2 of them or 3 of them. And they have to suit up and show up every morning and spend time with you so you can get them down on the page. And they will reveal to you what the story is and what they would do. I believe they know what their story is and who they are and what happens to them and what they up and do or are capable of doing. And you wish they weren't going to do, because it's going to be really painful for everybody else. But if you don't have a story that has a lot of pain, you probably don't have that interesting a story for me. I'm glad for you if that is the story of your life, that there was almost nothing all that painful or confusing. But I don't read books about people for whom that is true. So I once asked Ethan Kanan again to tell me the most valuable thing he knew about writing. And without hesitation, he said, nothing is as important as a likable narrator. Nothing holds a story together better. And you know what? I think he's right. I disagreed that you should never write out of revenge, but I completely agree that if your narrator is someone whose take on things fascinates you, or is in another world that you've always longed to know more about, or somebody who reminds you of you and your family, and they have this illumination or insight that you've never had before, I'm going to keep reading. There's certain characters that, like the Douglas Adams characters, I can't. Who wrote Hitchhikers? No, that was Douglas Adams. Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, very famous. and Reese will look it up. And John, The World According to Garp, who I've lost interest in him as John Irving, but The World According to Garp is so stunning and imaginative and encapsulates every single thing I've said about something being at stake, about characters we care about illuminating and guiding and surprising us, and having every single person wild twists and turns that are the only thing you believe that character could have done. There are people who Tom Robbins, read Even Cowgirls Get the Blues. It'll make you laugh. You'll thank me forever. Read Garp, The World According to Garp. These are books that I loved in my 20s, and people probably don't read as much about. So a character, a likable narrator, with like John Cleese or Anthony Hopkins or Bette Midler, you'll watch them fold laundry for an hour or so. They don't have to do anything. John Irving wrote The World According to Garp. I think I already said that. So anyway, that's who your characters are. Having a likable narrator is like having a great friend whose company you love, whose mind you love to pick, who has this running commentary on everything you see. And so ask your characters, what would you do if you were trapped in an elevator with someone you can't stand, somebody who's betrayed you? The elevator breaks down. What would you do? I would clam up. Okay, you're there for a while. Then what happens? I think I might say, this is pretty crazy. How are you doing? I'm sure they'll, ask them. They will know what to do. They will know what they would do. And you will know that it rings true because, Mel Brooks said, this is important. He said, listen to your broccoli and your broccoli will tell you how to eat it. And my students in Book Passage used to give me broccoli pens. I still have one because I so swear by that. It means listen to your instincts. Is what your character just told you they'll do the truth? You think, oh, I don't want them to do that. Listen to your broccoli. If you think, no, I don't know, I don't think so, maybe later, listen to that. It's your book, it's your short story, it's your memoir. So I want to take a break in a minute and let Reese talk for a minute, because he really has these brilliant, wait, what?
I need to say something.
Oh, I said Reese, and I think Reese wanted me to say Neil. Oh, yes, Elaine, what do you want to say?
Well, first of all, we have over 90 questions.
Okay.
So I'll probably
Okay.
put them together as we go. But
Yeah.
we have written down every single book you've recommended.
Okay.
And Sandra is putting together the list, and we'll be sending it out to everybody how they can get it on bookpassage.com.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Well, so why don't we take a break here? Are you ready to go with Reese? Okay, with Neil. And then I'll meet you back here in 10 minutes, and we will stop at quarter after the next hour. And I'll take as many of your questions as I can, but there's a lot more stuff I want to talk to you about in publication agents and stuff like that. So, okay, I'll meet you back in 10.
I'm Neil. My wife, Annie, is, as you know, a famous literary author. I'm an unknown hack author. I've been a hack writer for most of my adult life. I've made a living being a hack writer in various ways. It's odd, but in a certain way, there's not a lot of difference to each other, for Annie and me, between being a literary author and a hack writer. For both of us, writing is our default mastery. We write about subjects we're interested in. We may have a mastery in those subjects. We may develop a mastery in those subjects. But when it comes down to it, when we think about how we navigate the world in a productive way, our mastery is writing. And that means we've spent years and years mastering writing. And that doesn't mean that we're perfect or that we're necessarily any good at it. That's not for us to decide. It's just that we're able to use it as our way to navigate life. And we use it so that we have something that can provide us with income, or provide us with a sense of belonging, or provide us with a sense of just the sheer entertainment of feeling we have a mastery of something. The mastery of writing starts with grammar and syntax, and how to use syntax, how to use grammar in order to get to semantics, to get to meaning. But then it shifts. Once all those things are kind of known 80% well enough to be able to write coherent sentences with some regularity, then the interest of the writer, of somebody whose default is writing, is how can I be more persuasive? Not like a propagandist, but it's more like a mathematician whose interest becomes, how can I solve this problem elegantly? And they may not be able to describe what elegance means, but they know it. It has to do with efficiency. It has to do with not including extra steps, that sort of thing. But it also has to do with leaps of interest, noticing that, oh, if I divert into this logical sequence, it may come back and help me later as I figure out this difficult problem. Writing's exactly the same. Everything's the same. You present yourself with as complicated a problem as you can, and you solve it as elegantly as you can. Over time, I learned rules for persuasive writing, rules for how to get my ideas across and articulated in a way that would catch people's attention and keep their attention longer. And so I've written them down. I've forgotten how many, 35 or 40 or something like that. And I'm going to run through them very quickly with you. First one, use strong verbs. You've probably heard this one before in one manner or another. Question every appearance of the verbs to be, to do, or to have. That's because those verbs aren't verbs of action. To be is a verb of identity. To do is a meaningless verb. And to have is a verb of possession. And identity and possession are inert. Strong verbs don't just activate the reader. They also jar you into new sentence structures. Verbs have a certain way of appearing in a sentence that you don't necessarily control. And so you're going to have to adjust sentences when you find a really cool verb. Second rule, substitute an Anglo-Saxon, shorter or punchier word for a Latinized, longer or more abstract one when you can. 3, the complete etymology of a word is tucked into its current meaning. Know your important word's origins. Most words trace back to orientation, up, down, back, front, or resources, full, empty. So does most of life. Question all transitional phrases. Is it needed? If so, the logic of the scene or argument may be flawed. Cut transitions unless needed. If a word rings false to me, it will ring false to the reader. If you see a bunch of little words in a sentence, you can probably get rid of some of them. The strongest element of a sentence usually belongs at the end. If it sounds literary, it isn't. Show, then tell. Most people learn it wrong. You learn it show, don't tell. Good writers riff on ideas. They show you a scene, and then you see their abstract reasoning about that scene or their sense of what the consequences of that scene are. Let the breadth of your way of thinking appear to the reader. That's what gives it some juice. Don't repeat the same word in a sentence. Don't repeat the same unusual usage in a chapter. Don't repeat the same aphorism in a book. And thought-through exceptions are frequent. Vary weakens what it modifies. Delete it. A semicolon links two complete sentences. It reinforces and seems to prove their connection. Use intentionally short sentences to bring the reader home, like this. Within a page of your protagonist appearing, prove through the eyes of another character that he or she is lovable and lovely, even if your protagonist is a sociopath. In nonfiction, slide in an authoritative reference soon after presenting your thesis. You can use cliches to your heart's desire, but only if you twist them until they bleed. Like music, writing involves rhythm, harmony, and melody. Are you Paul, a pure melodist? John, a rhythmic harmonist? George, a harmonist? Or Ringo, a rhythmic melodist? Know the rule backward and forward. Trust its protective qualities before you test it and then break it. Relearn the rule after breaking it. This is Annie's favorite one. I probably learned it from her. Remove the boring stuff. Your reader may know much more about your characters than you do. Assume seamlessness and then protect it. Get rid of anything that stands out. Go back and add in the sensory information you left out. Smells, flavors, touch, ambient noises. All of us tend to focus and spend a lot of time on the visuals and forget that there's a lot more going on around us at the same time. Said is always enough. Chuckled, smiled, ranted, explained, all of them are too much. Don't find synonyms for said, and drop explanatory adverbs from attributions. Use a thesaurus. An imperfect word can be more jarring than a boring word. Take the time to find the perfect word. A scene lasts 1/2 to 2 pages, no more. By a scene, I mean a complete situation, complication, resolution, conflict. Characters in fiction must be compulsively, relentlessly tortured. By the climax, all escape routes must be closed. Soon after a character enters, describe them physically in one concise paragraph. You won't need to ever again. Distinguish your character's personality types. Use a Jungian archetype system if you want, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, just for consistency. Dialogue exposes how characters make choices. Don't let your people meander. Dialogue is crystallized thinking. Long sentences need to be linear, propulsive, and forward-moving with parentheticals that don't double back. 3 is the magic number for a series. Nothing is ineffable. Make the effort. Write the stuff that's hard to articulate. The unit of nonfiction is the paragraph, and some sentences merely move the plot along. But the unit of fiction is the sentence, and all sentences must serve multiple purposes, including 2 or more of meaning, plotting, character, diction, rhythm, harmony, and seamlessness. The point of finding your voice is that you don't have to try so hard anymore. Now you're allowed to riff and edit later. You might wish that you have a different voice, but that's like wishing to be ignorant. And finally, editors, help me with my blind spots. You can find this list at my website, which is shapesoftruth.com, and there's a tab for essays, and the list is called My Kit Bag. Thank you.
Me again. Hi, thank you, Neil. I went through this last draft and I took out maybe 60 varies, V-E-R-Ys. I use vary all the time. And I over and over and over again do what he says about writing the verb, finding the verb, and not using an adverb to describe it. But anyway, okay, I'm back. I have 25 minutes before we go to questions, and there's a couple of realms I want to cover. I sort of interject right here that a lot of you are interested in publication and are hoping to be published. If I were a young person coming up, I would very, very, very. I would probably be considering self-publishing, because the world of publishing, which is mostly New York City publishing, is can be just devastating. Everything takes forever and years. There are 250,000 general interest books. That includes novels published every single year. Any book you do write and get published has a slim chance of getting onto the shelves of bookstores, and it will last a week. If it's not selling, it'll be taken down. And there's another way to do it. Neil published his first book. He self-published it. And, he sold 350,000, 3,500, which is unbelievable to sell from, kind of metaphorically the trunk of your car. And it was really fun. And he was in charge. And his new book is with a publisher called Namaste. And it's been a really good experience. But somebody I just did an event with published with a very illustrious publishing house you think of as being really profound and human, and it has been a nightmare, just a nightmare for her. They did nothing, up until publication. They loved it, and they dropped it on its head. And it was like that little kid I dropped on its head from that little red flyer wagon. And then another friend was published 2 months ago by a real publishing house, and they forgot to make the copies you send out to reviewers. There's a thing called review copies that are printed on really bad paper, and that they send out to 1,500, 2,000 reviewers and bookstores to try to get some buzz going. They forgot to do that, so she came out of publication without anyone having read one word. And if you're a really well-known writer, it may go very well for you and you'll love your publisher. But if you aren't, boy, it's tough to break in. And so it's something to consider. But in any case, you really cannot publish anything unless you have an agent, period. And here's how to get one. You can Google it, it'll all be there. But the best tool is a publisher's marketplace website. You can get it for free the first month, and then you have to pay a month out, but you won't need to go to the second month. You can get the free month, and you can go to the deal section where all the deals are listed, and you can look up agents who represent your genre. If you're writing historical fiction, if you're writing romance, if they're writing memoirs, they're writing self-help or how-to books, and see how many deals they've made this year. Make sure they've made some. Then you can, it used to be when I was coming up, you could only write to one agent at a time because they were almost certainly going to take your book. And then all the agents that you sent it to were all going to take it, coincidentally, probably the same day. And then they'd all be enraged and no one would publish you. But A, that never once happened in history. And B, that was then. And now pick 10 or 20 agents from the publisher's marketplace. Is that what it's called? And that you want, that are published, that are representing authors that you like and that are writing stuff similar to yours. And then what you do, it's very simple, is you write a query letter. And it's basically a letter of introduction, who you are, what your book is about, and why this agent would be a good match for you and your book. So what you want to say, and it's got to be one page. It cannot be any more than one page. Because they're getting a lot of these. So who are you? How have you been published before? Or why you wrote this book in a sentence or two? What is this book about, including the themes, not just the plot of the story? And why are you writing to this agent? So you write a 3 or 4 sentence synopsis of your book in a nutshell. You use a couple of great lines from your book, of the 3 most irresistible lines. And then it's okay to attach the first 50 pages. It's going to be online. They don't have to open it. Don't be afraid. Just do it. It might have taken you 2 years or 5 years to write your book. And don't let it take you 6 months to write the perfect query letter. It's, there's no such thing. Hold on one second. I know a writer who published a book with a beautiful, beautiful publication. And she was the agent for it. She loved my friend's query letter, which was strong and charming in voice and in quotes, and it got her attention. It sucked her in. I last year had an URL for self-publishing, but I don't have that. I don't have a video, a visual of it this year, but you can go to Ingram Spark, www.ingramspark.com, and then I think it's called a backslash. Oh, are you putting it on the screen? Oh, you're not? Oh, he put it in the chat. Okay, it's there. It's the one that is Ingram Spark, how to self-publish a book. It's in the chat. You can go there right now. I'm going to skip ahead to some tools. I just want to do one brief thing first is how to tell when you're finished. This question, I bet it's in one of the questions that Elaine is going to be the MC for, but I'm just going to read this from Bird by Bird. We write because we want to create a golden palace of illumination and brilliance, and instead it's a shanty town. It's a tent city at the capital where it seemed like a good idea for people to bring their dogs. But for those who are wearing good glasses, all of life, of goodness and strive and endurance is there. And I didn't bring the quote from Bird by Bird, but I know that what I said is that at some point you start to hurt the work and you just happen to know this is the best I can do. And I'm going to send it off for this round. And if no one takes it, then I'm going to make it, maybe make it a little bit better. Maybe some of the people who didn't accept it as your agent gave you some advice. They said it's too long. There's too many different voices. There are, or maybe they gave you some good advice. They said, I love the voice, but a lot of this was confusing. You jump around or whatever. And you take that advice, you give it to somebody in your reading group, your writing group, I mean, and they say, well, I love it. I don't really get it, but I'm wondering if maybe that it's okay for you to have two narrators because you keep trying to paraphrase this person and maybe give them their own voice. Get some feedback and do it again and send it out to a whole nother batch. Some agents may have said, I'd be interested in seeing what you do next. And you can then prey on them. And in 6 months or whatever it takes you to get another version of it written, you can write to them and said, you said on August 5th that you'd be really glad to see what I wrote next. Well, instead, I've really redone this book. And I think, I wonder if you might take a look at it. And again, they might. So anyway, I want to give you some quick and classic tools before we go to your questions. Okay. I already told you about the legal size paper. It just for some psycho-spiritual reason is really great to scribble on and to scribble down every idea, every holiday, every birthday, every Christmas, every classroom, every boy or girl you ever liked, every person who ever hurt you. Did you ever see a dead body? Probably you saw a pet when you were little. Every pet you can remember, just scribble, scribble, scribble. Legal size paper is just great. One really important thing to investigate are books that have something to do with the project you're working on. You study at the feet of the master, see how they got time to pass in their novels. In the movies from the 40s or 50s, the calendar pages flew by, or the hands of the clock whirled around, think of a way to get, maybe the old dog in the story's muzzle has gone gray. Maybe yours has. Time passes, and you can't just keep saying, oh, well, then a few years later. And because of that great John Gardner quote, that you're creating a dream and the dream must be vivid and continuous, you can't go backwards and say, oh, I forgot this one thing. cut and paste, cut and paste. The dream must be vivid and continuous. Okay, so one book that has been very, very important for me was written by Evan Cannell, who was actually one of my dad's best friends. And he wrote a book that I have foisted on every single student I've ever worked with, and it is Mrs. Bridge. And there's another book by a New Yorker writer named Renata Adler that you may need to find through a used book dealer. It's called Speedboat. And in my 20s, I read these books over and over and over because they gave me a new way of doing this, of writing novels. They were in short takes. They were completely coherent. Some chapters were 3 paragraphs. Some chapters were 8 pages, but they all were in the same voice. They were one piece. They were thrilling. The writing of Mrs. Bridge and Mr. Bridge too, although it's a little bit darker. But if you read Mrs. Bridge, first of all, you'll owe me forever. And second of all, it'll give you a new structure to think about. Read a book with multiple narrators. I happen to love a book with 2 main narrators, or even 3. Read, what's it called? Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, the most perfect novel, I think, in memory. It's 4 different people that are brought down. I'm not going to give it away. Just read it. Poisonwood Bible, 4 people, 4 women, all different ages and relationships to the protagonist of the book. And tell me a story, make me care. How are you going to do that? So last year we had 2 photographs on screen. One was the lily pads with a huge graph paper. I always need 2 sheets of graph paper, and they're horizontal, so they fill a whole wall of the places that I know I have to land and anything I know about them already, and a place in the circle where I can add stuff that I figure out as I go, or that comes to me, or that straightens me out, or that wants to be way earlier or at the very end. And the other photograph was of a clothesline I have in my office. And if you come next year, I'll have it back in on the screen. But Neil nailed it or screwed it from one, put up screws at one end of my tiny office, which is an 8 by 10 or a 7 by 10, spanning the 7-foot wall. And on it, I use clothespins. And what I do is I print out sections, sometimes passages, sometimes whole chapters. Sometimes I do interviews. I can do them with, I can do them with the guys at Square One Studio. I can do them with Neil. I can do them with a friend. I just do these interviews on my phone sometimes. I get them printed out, and I put a clothespin on them, and I put them on this clothesline so they can breathe a bit, so they don't have my hot breath breathing down their neck, so they can air out a little bit. And it's so incredible because I'll forget that they're there. And when I'm not quite sure what to do next, I'll see one that I have this whole passage on these houseplants that I love, because it's not really about houseplants. It's about fear, and it's about where I find safety, and it's about my imagination. And I'll get that down off the clothesline. But that's the other photograph I wish I could show you. One piece of advice I want to give you is to tape dialogue. Dialogue's hard. And as Neil said, you don't need to find other words for said. You don't have to say said with every line of dialogue. If you can show us through the words that each person speaks who it is, you don't need to say, as Annie said, as Katie said, she sounds very different. She's very young. As Reese said, because he's male or whatever, you don't have to say said every time, but you don't need to say, well, that's quite a dog. He chortled, because I see the word chortle and I'm going to stop reading your book. So, but that's just me. Okay. Another thing, the great short story writer, Alice Adams. If you're writing short stories, read Alice Munro, read John Cheever, read those collected John Cheever stories. They're perfect short stories. See how he does it. See how time passes. See how the story begins, the setup, what happens, how it ends. See what the plot is. See what the chord is, what the major chord is. See how they do it. See how Alice Munro does it. But I happen to know Alice Adams years ago. She passed years ago, but she gave me the formula for short stories, and I want to share that with you now. It works for novels too. It works for pretty much everything. It's A, B, D, C, E. Okay, so it's out of order. A, B, D, C, E. So start something, what you're writing, your book, your story, whatever, starts with action. Something happens that is sort of interesting, and it makes us want to find out more, makes us want to turn the page. We see a woman in a bridal gown smoking crack, or mortal enemies trapped in the bus that shut down, or the elevator. We see some people together. We see the characters who you want us to gaze on, to know, to meet, to be curious about. B is for the background, is where you let us see and know who these people are, how they've come to be together, what was going on before the opening of the story when we first lay eyes on them. The background, so-and-so had an affair. Does the wife know? I think she does, but we pretend she doesn't. She pretends she doesn't. So-and-so borrowed a bunch of money he never paid back. So-and-so has only been sober for 4 days in a row at this wedding party, whatever. The background, there are ways to say it. Well, like Neil says, show and then tell. Show it, that they pass
But
by.
I'm also trying to text them to her, so she may not.
I can hear you, Elaine. Okay, B. The D is for development. You move these people along. Stuff happens. They're having conversations. They're finding things. They're buying things. They're hiding things from others. They're slipping stuff into their pockets so no one sees that they took it. What did they take? What was it? Why did they take it? We find out what they care most about, what they most have at stake, because then you have tension. Where do they have skin in the game? What is at stake for each of them? What do we come to know as the plot unfurls, scene by scene? Think about how Carolyn Shute creates those Christmas tree ornaments that are a perfect small scene. How did that scene move the plot along? How did that scene illuminate who the person is and really what's going on here? Because the tension will grow out of that process. And then C is the climax. It's probably on page 14 of a short story. It's 4/5 of the way through in a novel. The climax is the major chord, usually towards the end, that brings together all the tunes and chords that you've been playing so far into one major chord, after which at least one of the people is profoundly changed. If it was a symphony, there would be the crashing of drums, or the kettle drum, or 10 triangles all at once. There's usually a killing, whether it's of a person or of someone's spirit, or of an illusion, which is very good, or something terrible inside their soul that is not, it's a deadness inside of their soul may die. It may be a union. It may be a reclamation. It may be a rescue of the fragile prize. Don't force the climax. Ask yourself and show us what the people feel toward one another, what they say, how they smell, what they fear, what they love. And these things take the people and the story where it will. And the ending means now the characters are different because of all of these different things that have unfolded. In some real way, they're different. And in your ending, what is our sense of who the people are now? And what are they left with? And what happened? And what does that mean? And now what? Okay, that would be the last lily pad in the pond, where you let your reader sit a moment and experience it all. Maybe nod their head or shake their head and take a long deep breath and go, huh? It should both be very surprising and be completely logical that their actions and their characters brought us to this moment. Okay, the last thing, and then we'll do some questions. I'm not sure that you know how many people are going to help you with your writing. I don't know if you know that other people will help you with your work, and they will enter into the difficult birth process with you, like labor coaches, and read your stuff and give you criticism. I have a tiny problem with criticism. And whenever someone gives it to me, my first way is that I think, okay, that's that. We're not friends anymore. But I am so grateful for good criticism, for people that will tell you what works and what doesn't work. And you can form little writing groups. You might know other people that are here today, that you all came to this workshop together. You might, you go to a junior college and you take a writing class. You go to your church, you go to your gym, and you post a note, I'm starting a writing workshop. I'm starting a writing group. You go to the bookstores. That's always the best place to start. And you put up a note that you're starting a writing group. And does anybody want to come to every other Thursday and meet with you for a cup of coffee and to share the pages you've written? And then you have to show up with pages. It's another form of benevolent pressure that you have to have 4 pages. You have to get some work done, because they are, and this will be like so huge, a blessing for you to have other people, and you're going to help them. That's going to be as much of a blessing as them helping you. But at some point you write alone, and you write and you share your heart and your soul and your spirit and your inside self. And you want people that you trust, who are intelligent and respectful and truthful, and do that in a way that you can hear and that you can consider. And so find them, because they're out there, I promise, and you can't do it without them. You need people to go through your finished work and copy edit it, for one thing, especially if you're going to send it off to an agent. You need someone to read your query letter and copy edit it and say, you know what, no, that sounds self-aggrandizing. That I love, go with that. You know, you need feedback. You get in like this echo chamber of your own self and your excitement that you finished, and the inner critic telling you, what's the point? Why bother? Blah, blah, blah. If you can find someone to send it to who you trust, who will do a really good, clear, honest, helpful job of feedback, it's probably the hugest thing in terms of finding yourself as a writer, is to find a writing partner, find a group, find one person. I know a couple of resources for you, and then we'll take questions. One is, I know a writer named Meredith Moran who does this kind of birth coaching, and she's a great writer. And she's also, she used to have a Renta Yenta website where she can take you through, and it's expensive. That's the problem. And her what she can do is kind of help you with whatever work you have, help you get more of it written, help you figure out if it's publishable, help you try to get it published, and she'll give you a lot of feedback on what she thinks you ought to do, and a lot of instruction on how to do it. She's invaluable. You can write to her at Meredith Moran you can write to her at Meredith at meredithmoran, MARAN.com, and that's in the chat. And and tell her Annie sent you. And the other thing is Book Passage, where almost everything that you need is also available. Just contact Catherine Petrocelli. It's PetroCelli at Book Passage, and she can connect you to some mentors. She can connect you to some classes. Every day there's something to do at Book Passage that will help you develop as a writer, help you find a mentor, help you find an agent, help you find a writing group, help you find someone who can help you become a better and better writer. Check out Left Coast Writers, which is led by the great Linda Watanabe McFerrin. And she helps writers connect with mentors. And also she has a newsletter, panels, classes. It's all out there. And I just want you, I want it, you won't give up if you get someone to help you, if you get a partner in all of this, you won't give up. And just don't give up. You're here because you want to write, and you get to write. And I believe that you're a really true and reliable narrator of your life story and of stories that you've dreamt up. And I believe it's valuable to your spirit and to your life story, to your biography, that you get this writing done. So let people help you, okay? We are somehow, Elaine now is going to be the MC for the questions that you've left on the chat. And we've got a lot, 45 minutes or so. So let's get started.
Well, thank you so much, Annie. I feel like I'm going to go home and get my legal paper, and I'm going to start. People always ask me if I write, and I say, oh, no, I can't do that. But you've inspired me. We'll see what happens. I have so many questions, but many of them, fortunately, have been answered in the last 20 minutes. So you must have been psychic to know what some of these questions were, and I'm putting some together.
Okay.
But, here's one that's kind of fun.
Okay.
I've never watched Ted Lasso, but maybe you have. And this person says that Ted Lasso is mentioned bird by bird twice. And he's
Yeah.
a friend in the writing group there.
Yeah, I know. That was like the high point of my life so far.
And then speaking of bird by bird, someone also has asked if you have ever considered writing a version for young people.
That's a really
I've
good
given it to
question.
my teenage grandchildren. I don't know. What do you think?
I've thought of it, but I've thought about a bird by bird for the modern era, which means that I wrote the first book I ever wrote on computer was bird by bird, and so I thought of a book called More Birds. That was for the generation that is coming up now, and that has been, the millennials and younger. But I kind of think bird by bird is its own self. And when I read it at Square One Studio, I honestly couldn't think of anything that I'd left out. There's probably a class at a book passage where people are talking about how to do revision, how to do revisions. You cut and paste, you print out. I always want people to read drafts on paper and send money to the Sierra Club and, print out a lot more. But I don't really know anything more. The way to teach children is, I'm not sure that I have a really good book on that. I've done workshops with Jax from kindergarten through 5th grade. And then I think middle school, it's a little mortifying to have your grandparent come, shuffling in, wiping at her eyes and trying to find her glasses that are on top of her head. But I always taught the exact same things I've talked about today. I've talked about short assignments, bird by bird. Oh, one thing I left out, another tool is the 1-inch picture frame that I've always had my students put a 1-inch picture frame on their desk and give it to one another. And to remind themselves that they only have to write as much as they can see through that 1-inch picture frame. You can see a snippet of the movie, or you can see a snippet of the screenplay. You can see this memory of being out at Inverness the day that your aunt and uncle got so drunk when you and your girl cousins were 4 and 5, and one of you got lost under the reeds for a terrifying 30 seconds, blah, blah, blah. And you only have to write that. You don't have to figure out where it goes. You don't have to do anything but see it through the 1-inch picture frame. I teach the little kids that if they close their eyes like this, that there's a whole movie screen on the back of their eyes, and they can see a story. They can see a moment there. They can see an imagination there. They can see a dinosaur there. They can see a slumber party there. And that's all they have to write is what they can see through that 1-inch picture frame. But I probably won't do it, although because I don't have much to add to it is the problem.
Just a commercial for Book Passage. We are actually having a summer writing camp for young
Great.
Writers. So if someone is interested, just write classes at bookpassage.com and we'll see if there's room. A couple of people have been talking about what happens when you just keep getting rejection after rejection after rejection, and how do you keep going?
Well, you will keep getting rejection after rejection after rejection. Janine Reed, who wrote The Opposite of Certainty, which actually Meredith Moran was the editor for, and which she published in a huge publisher. She got something like 21 straight rejections from agents, and then she got an agent, and they got something like 25 straight rejections from publishers. You just don't give up. You can self-publish. There's a way to do it on Amazon. There's a way to do it. Neil publishes for a living, but it's expensive again. But there's a format he uses that you can do, but it's very confusing. I could never do it, and it might be called lulu.com. Can you look that up, Reese? It sounds very much like lulu.com. And also Amazon has ways to self-publish. It's the formatting that's really hard. And Neil does the copy edit of it too, which is extensive and takes, a week. It's called lulu.com. Go to lulu.com. And if you're young, you can probably figure it out. Do you have a self-publishing
Yes. First of all, I would like to say that almost every independent bookstore will not carry your book if you publish through Amazon, because Amazon makes it impossible
Oh,
for
right,
the
right.
store to make any money. Plus, their goal in life is to put us out of business, and we'd like to help them not do that.
Okay.
But every author's book can and should be sold on Amazon, as well as every other site. If you publish through Ingram Spark, which
Okay.
Annie mentioned, you will be on everyone's website, or you can be, including the big guys and the little guys. So when your aunt calls and asks you if you will send her some free books, say, oh no, you can just go on this web to your local bookstore and they'll get it for you. But you mentioned Left Coast Writers, and they have a wonderful person who's a member who helps that happen. And yes, we do have classes at the store for it too.
Okay. So you will get rejected. You will. It just comes with the territory. I have a great friend, my brother Love Esther Law from my church, St. Andrew. He's writing this extraordinary book about his life growing up in Jim Crow, the Deep South, and his father. It's called Forefathers, F-O-R-E, Fathers. And I want someone to publish it. Maybe someone here can get a hold of Book Passage. And I believe it will get published, but it's an unusual book, because most books now, people are writing books that will be easily translated into the movies or into an 8-part series on Netflix. And this is a very literary, human, personal book. And he has never given up. And he went through a flurry of agents, and they loved it. And they gave him great advice. Try this. Oh, this doesn't work for us. I don't think I can find a publisher. And publishers will say the same thing, and they'll reject you. And it always hurts. And they might say, we don't think we can, we don't think we have a way of publishing this successfully. That's not our wheelhouse. We don't publish books like this, but I loved it, and I wish you good luck. Otherwise, you might get a form letter that we're not taking new writers at this time. And an agent might say that, or an agent might say, you know what, I love your voice, and I wish I could take you on. I'm not taking anyone else on. You just don't give up. So Love Esther is writing this book, Forefathers, and it is such an incredible joy and undertaking and process, and it brings with it so much healing, and it brings so much clarification of his own story and his own father and his father's own father and the children he's a father to and who will be fathers to. And it's so beautiful, and I believe it will get published, but the point is, he has never given up. And Janine never gave up. 21 agents rejecting her mostly with form letters, 24 publishing houses rejecting her, and the 25th taking it and doing a really beautiful job with it. And then, it sold whatever it sold. Unless you write a book that's going to be a Netflix 8-part series, it is Lessons in Chemistry was a very, very unusual book. It's been number one on the New York Times forever, but I bet you got a lot of rejections. Joseph Heller had Catch-22 rejected over and over and over. An astonishing number of rejections on Catch-22, which is one of the only books from the 20th century that's iconic, that people are still reading. And if you Google rejection letters or the rejection letters of famous writers, it'll give you faith. But you just don't give up. And you go to Writer's Marketplace and you find 20 more agents. And you don't say, oh, I hate myself and 25 other people have hate. You just say, I'm writing this book that a lot of people have expressed excitement about, And maybe those people were in your family. Maybe they were a publisher that didn't think they could publish it or whatever. But you just keep going. You don't give up. And so that's what you do.
You mentioned Lessons in Chemistry. She was rejected by 98 agents.
Oh my gosh.
She has been on the bestseller list for a very long time now. She was 65 when she got that book published.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of lessons there.
Yeah.
Someone's asked, do you have any tips to stop censoring your writer's voice? I want to write the way I talk, but it doesn't seem to translate.
Well, people say to me, oh, you write exactly like you talk. And it's so funny because everything I write, as I've been talking about today, takes me draft after draft after draft. And I don't try to get it to sound like I talk, but it's my voice. And in fact, always, I've talked a lot about this at Book Passage, at events and workshops there. When I was coming up, I just wanted to sound like Isabel Allende because I love her voice so much. And if you read Lessons in Chemistry, you're going to want to sound just like her. And if you read, the great Australian writer, Jane Harper, don't you love her, Elaine? She wrote Dry and a new book called, forgot.
Yeah, darn it. My mind's not working.
Jane Harper, Australia. You're going to want to sound like her. And it turned out I couldn't tell my truth in Isabel Allende's voice. And I could only tell you the truth in my voice. It doesn't mean that if you write a novel, you have to sound like you living in West Marin or in East Oakland. It means you can write about a character from 180 degrees away from your own reality and your own, accent and way of speaking. But Exiles is the new Jane Harper. Everything she's written is just magic, though. She's wonderful. But what it means is that, as I've talked a lot about, and as Neil talked a little bit about, it's just that voice of self-criticism that says your voice isn't good enough and that you should sound more erudite. I always felt when I was coming up, my dad was a well-known writer, and but the only people that mattered were East Coast male intellectuals who were all like getting published in the New Yorker and in the New York Times. And that was the only value there was. And women weren't on the bestseller list probably until, I bet Muriel Spark was briefly, and Shirley Jackson, and then Gone with the Wind, But oh wait, I lost my train of thought. But I grew up thinking that what mattered were East Coast male intellectuals, because that was who my father worshipped. That's who we bowed down before at breakfast. But you know who I fell in love with early on and very influentially was Irma Bombeck. And she was so funny. And Patrice Daly's Adelaide Daly was writing a column in the Chronicle that was sort of like Irma Bombeck's. It was very domestic, very funny, very, very human, and sometimes laugh out loud funny. And that gave me confidence. So If you can find somebody who's writing at all like you're writing, it might give you the confidence that your voice, your voice is valuable. Your voice is as valuable as anybody's voice, and your truth, you'll find, is probably universal. That's what I found more and more, that when I was writing stuff that was pretty intimate, people would say, "Oh, you're so brave to write about this or that or the other, how, and your neuroses or this." And every single thing I've published has been stuff I'm almost positive is universal, that we all have this ping pong game going on between, our terrible self-esteem and our grandiosity and our injured ego. We all have that fear that we're about to be busted, that we're frauds, and that we're not good enough, and people are about to make that decision and get rid of us and find somebody who's a lot better. So my deepest belief is that if you write the truest, most real stuff, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that we're going to find it universal. It's only a few stories,
Several people have asked about social media and wanted to know what platforms are important. And one person asked, should I get on social media before I'm published?
Oh, that's like a complicated question, because probably nothing is going to distract you more from your actual writing, your real writing, than social media and checking things out on Facebook or Instagram or their cell phone, and endlessly checking out Twitter and whatnot. But at the same time, the reality is, well, Sam and I published a book called Some Assembly Required many, many years ago, when his son was born. And he said to me, "I won't publish with you unless you get onto Twitter." And my publisher then ended up saying the same thing. They wanted me on Twitter and Instagram, and I ended up on Facebook because I could just write. I don't follow Facebook, which is probably why I get any work done at all. But every so often I'll publish like notification of this event, or I wrote something about Mother's Day that's on right now. I wrote something about the last shooting where I just wrote, "I cannot stand this. We cannot keep doing this." And I wrote on. And I just noticed today that Facebook has censored it because it doesn't mean it, because I said something about it's not going to happen in the Congress. The Congress is always going to support guns because that's where the blah, blah. And that to them constituted hate speech, and they have censored it. And so I guess that doesn't answer anything, but if you're going to, it's an incredible advantage if you start getting a platform together, because you can mention this in your query letter that you have an audience. And if you can start, I know people have turned on Facebook, and I have such limited technological skills that it's very easy for me to do. I'm able to do it, which is why I stay there. But if you can get a readership, if you can get 1,000 people following you on Facebook or Instagram, if you can get like 1,800 people following you on Twitter, that's solid. And the way that you do it is by putting some thought into it and by writing stuff and getting people to retweet it, asking everyone, will you retweet this? And little by little, you get 100 people, then you get 213 people following you. And then you tell them, "Oh, I've written a piece on Facebook," and you give them the link, or you do a link on Facebook to your Instagram, and you make them be, as I start off saying, you've asked us to come sit around the campfire because you got something to tell us. Tell us a story, make us care. Tell us something really funny that happened today. You can do that in 230 or whatever. I think it's 240 words on Twitter. You can tell a lot on 240 words. If I do something on Twitter that's involved, I didn't just spring out of my head. I didn't just scribble it down. I worked it. Everything for me is slow going. I need drafts even of Twitter stuff. The stuff I wrote on Facebook, the Mother's Day thing, when I originally wrote it, it reads like I talk. It reads like I just said, okay, Mother's Day bothers me because everyone is shouting Happy Mother's Day at you without being aware of whether it's an incredibly painful day because your mother just died, or your mother left you, or your children are, estranged from you or on drugs. You don't know. So if I go to the movie and someone shouts Happy Mother's Day at me, I might be the wrong person to shout Happy Mother's Day at. And I just said, so be conscious of this, and in churches, God, they might give roses to the mothers and leave all the other mothers out. So I wrote this piece, and it sounds like I'm talking just now, but it took hours, and I don't even think it's 800 words, which might be 2.5 typewritten pages, right? And so you do it, you put care into it, you start trying to get published here and there. And if you have 500 Facebook followers, if you send stuff up to small presses. You don't want to get published in the Marin Journal. You get published at Marin Journal, and you know what? A few people notice it. And a few people write letters to the editor, and they say, I really love that. And the editor says, hey, would you want to write a piece for us about? Then you have an assignment, which makes everything infinitely easier because you don't have to think up something. They say, do you want to write about the difference in the pickleweed community, since you were little and nowadays and whatever. So you just keep moving. It's like Parcheesi, where you just keep moving the game pieces forward. You get published in the Pacific Sun. You write an editorial. That's how Janine got started. She had a sick kid. That's what her book is about. And she wrote a piece in the Washington Post, published it on Obamacare saving her, that you can have all the interesting opinions you want on Obamacare or Obama, but the reason my kid who has brain cancer is getting great care is because of Obamacare. So thank you for sharing, and she wrote another piece, and it got published at Slate. And you just keep moving these Parcheesi pieces forward. And then when you get your query letter, you kind of are playing around with it a little bit. You say, I've been published in the Washington Post and Slate, among other periodicals. Maybe don't mention the Pacific Sun. I don't know. I love it. I mean, Pacific Sun was central to me becoming well known. But at any rate, you do what you can, and you get together a platform. You get together a site where people can read what you're writing before you can get a bigger thing published. And so, yeah. And that's how things have really taken off for me, is through social media. And I do not have my phone on when I'm writing, I want to say.
That, I think, maybe one of the most sage things that we've heard today. Don't have your phone on when you're writing. But there are several questions. That was brilliant, Annie, as always. But there are several questions about your writing process and how do you keep yourself doing it, and what do you do so that you do have the discipline to write? Could you talk a little bit about what your day is like and how you do it?
Yeah. I wake up very clear. I'm just one of those people that I wake up since I got sober with a lot of clarity. And sometimes it's strange. Sometimes ideas have come to me in my sleep, and sometimes, like that dream I told you about, where Janine said, I'm breaking up with you. You're annoying, and you're too needy, and everyone thinks so. Sometimes I wake up with all of a sudden a transition to two seemingly unrelated sections that all of a sudden I know how to connect really organically, how to weave the two of them together. But in general, what happens is when I'm in the middle of something, like I've been working on this same book, it's called Somehow, Thoughts on Love, for about 9 months now. But I had a lot of it written in dribs and drabs. I mean, you cannot go wrong with dribs and drabs. And they were on not clothes hangers, on a clothesline with clothespins. And on this long desk I have, it's not even a desk, it's what you serve food on at a family dinner. I have bits and pieces and index cards and things I printed out. And so it went pretty easily. But for 9 months, I wake up and I have ideas. And I'm kind of excited to get to it. And I have coffee. I have 2 cups of coffee every morning, never more, never less. And I sit down and I open the file that I'm working on, or I start a new chapter, a new essay, and I start writing, and it goes really badly, and I keep going, and I write for a certain amount of time. I used to write from about 9 to 4 when I was young, and I don't anymore. I write several hours a day. If I'm on a deadline, which I was before I sent this book off on Tuesday, I had 2 weeks of just kind of writing all day, and I get in bed with my iPad and I write late into the night because Neil goes to sleep really early, and I'm having more ideas, and I like to look over what I've written that day. But typically 3 hours, I can get a tremendous amount of work done. The most recent new thing I wrote was the piece on what we can do in the face of this escalating gun violence. And it took forever, but I woke up with it, and I just had that one line to go on. I cannot stand this. I cannot stand this. And I said, I always write these really nice, hopey, feely faith pieces. We take care of the poor, and we pick up litter, and we're gentle. And I said, I don't have that in me today. And I did, as it turned out, later in the piece, but I didn't know what I was doing, and it came out really badly. It came out, dogmatic. It came out political, which was not the point. It came out, although I did mention the current Congress, which was deemed too political for Facebook to keep running. And I just write and write and write and write. I get up, I go outside, I get some fresh air. I always am making little snacks, and I sit down, and I've always used the image of the pop gun that Christopher Robin carried around, because those books were my childhood. And I always kind of carry this Christopher Robin pop gun into my office with me, and so that I can be really strict with myself and say, we're going to keep going, keep going, keep going. I usually don't go back and rewrite during the day. I often rewrite at night when Neil's gone to bed. I know how to do it all of a sudden. I all of a sudden am more willing to cut out, like Neil read in his section. I take out the boring parts. I do this immersion. I'm completely always immersed on what is on my heart to write, whether it's an essay for this book, whether it's an essay for Facebook. And at some point, usually I've written an incredibly shitty first draft. I always have. I'm not making that up. And then I write a second draft, and I start to get this feeling, and you have paid through the nose for this feeling that I might be writing something that is going to turn into something. That is as vague as it is. I might be writing something worthwhile, and I work it, and I work it, and I work it. And then I ask Neil or Janine or my friend Doug Foster if they have time to read it. They're always about 10 pages, manuscript pages. They're usually 3,000 words. It happens to be a really nice size and structure for me. Most pieces, I've already talked about this today, but they start off with, something's gone wrong. People are gathered and something's gone wrong. There's been a new tragedy. There's been a new loss. Somebody went to the doctor with a sore throat and they've been given 3 months to live. Somebody went to the doctor with headaches and they're pregnant, or something has happened, and it's shaking us all up. And I want to find my way to be in what has happened without shutting it out, or, pouring pink paint over the bad feelings, and instead seeing what the dark beauty might be, or seeing what the pathway through those brambles might be. And at some point I have kind of a second and a half draft where it's there, and it's really pretty good. I mean, I think you would think it's really good, but it might be a little bit, Janine or Neil will almost certainly say at one point, this doesn't go there. And they will say, I actually don't know why this is even in the piece. And they'll say, I don't think you need this whole passage. I know what you are after, but you do it in a different way, kind of scattered throughout the body of the piece. I don't think you need this long paragraph. And God, I'm always kind of hurt that they didn't say, oh, Annie, this is word perfect. Go with it. And I am grateful beyond words that they are helping me find my piece, that they're helping me take out the stuff that my editor will agree with them on, that they're helping me get the boring stuff out or the overwritten stuff out. There's always too much description. I love description, and they help me take some of it out. And then I have another day's work with one of them. Then I don't ever give it to more than one of them. They mark it up, and I push back my sleeves, and I often sit on the couch with the iPad and my animals, and I work it, and I get it right, and I take what I like, and I leave the rest. Sometimes Neil is wrong. Sometimes he thinks that I need another phrase at the end, and I don't. The way I end it it ends it for me on a dime, and I just ignore it. I don't mention it to him. And other times he's exactly right. And he has either said, I need something more there, or he's provided it. Right. So that is my typical day. And then I send it off with my editor, who is at the receiving end of my books.
And someone asked about editors because she said that she had heard that editors don't edit anymore. And that you really have to have your book pre-edited. And she wondered if that is true, or just something people who are having trouble getting published are saying.
I think to some extent it's true. And that because of the internet, there are so many editors for hire out there. That's what Meredith Moran is doing. That's what Catherine Petruccelli can help people get in touch with editors who will actually professionally edit you. You cannot send an unedited piece, really, even to an agent. An agent, it's not that editors don't edit anymore. It's that no one is going to represent it if it feels unedited. They really want work. The editor is going to do this incredible service for you when they when they've accepted it and bought it and started to work with you on it. They may tear it apart. They may only want certain kind of revisions. But you got to get it edited for the agent to take it. I really think that it's tough news, but you want a professional editor. And you may know someone who's a professional editor or a writer, a published writer, who will do it for you. Or you find one of the people that we've been mentioning all along that maybe is in chat or whatever, but you can't burn bridges by sending off work that isn't the highest quality it's going to be. The amazing thing is the highest quality you can get it to be, which might be the point at which an agent takes it, is not going to be the shape it's in when it's published. It's going to be 30% better. It's hard to believe. That's why I talked for 10 minutes when I did about how much help there is out there and how hard it is to receive that help. I mean, some of us are just so good at providing it. And it's so hard to seek it and receive it. And you need to. If you want to get published, you need to find somebody to work with you on your book, on your story, on your poems, on your screenplay. You can't send it off raw.
You mentioned screenplay, and I have a question here. Do you have any advice for TV or film writers who want to move from screenplay to writing novels? They must be on strike, those people that wrote that.
Yeah,
everyone I know wants to get a film written, but that's a fascinating question.
That's not really my strong suit, and I would Google the answer to that. But my feeling right off the top of my head is that if you can write a screenplay, you can write a novel, because a screenplay is kind of a plot treatment for a novel. It's kind of that plot treatment I did for Rosie, where I put it in sections, and then I wrote what is in A and how it gets to B. And I wrote a paragraph about what happens in B and how it leads to C and then C to D. I wrote that all up. And if you've written a screenplay, you've got an incredibly rich beginning of a novel. The way that you write screenplays is to read really, really good screenplays that you can get them at the library, you can get them online, and you take the screenplays you really love or that have been very popular, or if they're fantasy or science fiction or whatever, you read the great ones and you see how people move their characters through either a really ordinary story, like women talking, or Star Wars. You just see how people, or and now I can't think of a single other movie I've ever seen, but those are two. Um, you see how people did it. You study at the feet. I'm going to stop for a second, I think, because I read something, and I know I read it last year, and it was a 6-part novel, a way to write a 6-part novel. It's what? George, you want to read George Saunders' book for one thing.
Oh, yes,
my
definitely
God.
George Saunders.
What's it? Find the title. Something in a pond in the rain.
Mhm.
One of you, Neil can find it. I mean, not Neil, Reese can find
I
it.
can find it too.
Yeah, and there's that is an
think it's
incredible
Swimming in a
book
Pond.
on writing. Swimming. No, there's more than that. I looked up. I thought that I was going to write a novel, and I looked up something that is the 6-part novel, and it was so incredible. It's on A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, which is Saunders, and it is the most tremendous, wonderful writing book that has been published in 20 years. I mean, Stephen King's book is great and whatnot, but there was a structure for a 6-part novel. I read it and it was brilliant, and you might have to Google it because we're running out of time, but I also have something else. Do you have a couple of great last questions? Because if you don't, I have something.
You've covered so many good questions, and I'd like to hear what you have to say as to wind us up.
Okay. Well, it's actually not what I have to say. It's what wonderful Terry Tate has to say, because I asked her years ago, remember about 4 years ago, Elaine, I asked her she does she works with storytellers, and she's a wonderful writer. She wrote A Crooked Smile, but I asked her to tell me every single thing she knows about story. And I have 5 minutes left, and I want to read you the instructions she gave you. And I think that will bring us to the end, but I think it's the most valuable stuff I can leave you with. Okay. 1, trust that you are loaded with stories waiting to be told. Sometimes people who appear downright boring are harboring the best stories. 2, and Terry Tate has a website somewhere. Find it. She'll help you remember these. But anyway, trust that you're loaded with stories to be told. Sometimes people who appear downright boring are harboring the best stories. 2, don't try to think the story onto the page. Be present with yourself and let it flow from that place. 3, if you feel blocked, I'm going to give this to Elaine. I'm going to give you these 10 rules so that when we send out the recorded format, this will be a part of it. I think we can do that, right, Reese and Elaine? Okay, but let me read them to you now. If you feel blocked, tell the truth about what is getting in the way. She calls the inner critic the vile bitch upstairs, and I call it K-fucked radio. But tell the truth about what's getting in the way. That's the voice that's telling you you'll never be published, you're not good enough. Talk about beating a dead horse, blah, blah, blah. Okay, number 4, do what you can to clear the blockage. This may include serious work on yourself or just sharing with a friend why you don't think you have something to say, why you don't think your stories are good enough or interesting enough or universal enough, and then get present. Over and over again, get present and let these voices that you've squelched since childhood have their say. Write about the bad voices, write about the people from whom the bad voices are emanating. And then Terry says, start in the story. Don't tell us what you're going to tell us. Don't tell us why you're going to tell us the story. Start in with the story. This is the story of my son having a child at 19 years old, which were not my plans for him. Number 6, don't force humor. Being human is intrinsically funny. Tell the deepest truth and it will be hysterical. Other parts will be heartbreaking, of course, but you can't have one without the other. 7, be specific. Be specific. Paradoxically, the more detail, especially sensory detail you include, the more universal your story becomes. And 8, if you find yourself too close to a story, it may be too soon to tell it. Certain levels of messy pain aren't art, or you may need to tell it from a different vantage point. I used to tell therapy clients who were going home to their crazy families for Thanksgiving to pretend that they were Margaret Mead studying an Aboriginal tribe. Keep a safe distance and just watch what they do. It's not your fault they're crazy, and this is why you left the Outback, and you get to write about it. And we'll talk about libel another time. So we're out of time. Here's what I want you to remember: bird by bird. I want you to short assignments, a 1-inch picture frame, bit by bit, dribs and drabs. And 2, shitty first drafts. Just get it down on paper and you own it and it's yours. And study the great writers, study the masters, study the interviews of good writers, study writers and screenwriters and see how they did it. You can do it too. You can start to write like any of us that you love, and you will find your own voice and go, oh, that's not quite how I would say it. But the main thing is, I wish I had a photograph of my son's forearm so you could see his tattoo that says, don't give up. Just don't give up. One day at a time, and find a community. Call Catherine Petrocelli, plug in, and just take off. You can do it. You can do it.
Annie, thank you for the gift of these hours. It is incredible. And I learned so much every year. And I just feel so lucky that all of us were able to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Book Passage. Thank you, Square One Studio, Reese and Katie and Sam Lamott. And we'll see you next year.
Wait, I'll get in trouble with Annie if I don't say one thing. We're going to post all the books. They're going to be you can get a list of all of them. But more important, if you would like to order one of Annie's books on bookpassage.com, in the comments section, put your name that you want in it and a short. Annie didn't say that, I did, by the way, but if you want a personalization. So let us know, and I hope we'll see all of you soon and keep us posted on your writing careers.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being part of this.
Thank you.